Drake Sullivan, a former Special Forces operative turned restaurateur, uncovers a chilling betrayal at a family dinner. His wife Vanessa and her powerful family, led by corrupt Judge Norman Reed, plot to ruin him, celebrating her lover Brendan Walsh as their true son-in-law. Armed with evidence from ally Antonio Dominguez, Drake masterminds a covert operation, exposing the Reeds' crimes, murder, corruption, and ties to organized crime. With strategic brilliance, he dismantles their empire, reclaiming his life in restaurant, evolving into a shadow enforcer of justice. Drake's journey sparks curiosity. Who will he target next in his relentless pursuit of accountability? Love this gripping tale of betrayal and justice? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating stories that dive deep into human experiences. Your support fuels our storytelling, bringing fresh perspectives to life. Like, share, and join our community to stay curious and inspired with every new video. The doors of Bellini's swung open, and Drake Sullivan's gaze was immediately ensnared by the banner draped across the room. His breath caught in his throat as the words stared back at him. "Congrats to our daughter's true love." The laughter of his wife's family filled the air like a sickening symphony, too sharp to ignore. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner one he hadn't been told about, yet there they all were, her family gathered like a choir, singing a hymn of betrayal. The laughter faltered as Drake entered, and a hush descended over the room. His eyes flicked over to Vanessa, her smile painted on too perfectly, a blue dress that shimmered under the lights. His heart sank as he noticed Brendan Walsh, her high school lover, standing far too close for comfort. His arm was possessively around her waist, his fingers toying with the delicate fabric of her dress. Vanessa turned, her gaze briefly flickering with guilt before she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. "Drake, you're early," she greeted him, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too controlled. She leaned in to kiss him on the cheek, a gesture that felt more like an obligation than affection. "Are you?" His voice was quiet, steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. "Of course," she replied, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "This dinner is to celebrate Brandon's investment in Daddy's Senate campaign. You know how important this is for the family." Drake's stomach twisted. A toast began, and Norman Reed, Vanessa's father, raised his glass, his voice booming across the room. "When Vanessa first brought Drake home, I accepted him because my daughter seemed happy, but I always knew she could do better. And now, finally, we have a son-in-law worthy of the Reed name." A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd, the words stabbing Drake with each syllable. 5 years. 5 years of bending over backwards to meet the Reed family's impossible expectations, of endless sacrifices, of pouring his soul into a restaurant that they saw as nothing more than a stepping stone. He swallowed hard, but the bitter taste of humiliation burned in his throat. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" a server asked gently, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Water," Drake rasped, but when the server handed him the glass, it was not water that passed into his hands, but a folded note. He glanced down. His pulse quickened as he saw the familiar handwriting. "Mr. Sullivan, please meet me in my office immediately. Back hallway, last door on the left. Your wife and the Reeds have been using my establishment for meetings over the past 6 months. I have everything recorded. You need to see this now. Antonio Dominguez." Drake's chest tightened. Antonio Dominguez, the owner of Bellini's, a man with a reputation for discretion and integrity. He slipped the note into his pocket, steeling himself for what was to come. Vanessa noticed his movement, and her eyes darted nervously toward him. She attempted to cover it with a smile, but he could see the cracks. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone too casual. Drake offered her a smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that spoke volumes without a word. "Never better. Let's celebrate." He excused himself, making his way through the crowded room with deliberate slowness. As he passed through the back hallway, his mind raced. The door with Dominguez etched on the brass plate seemed to grow larger with each step. He knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. Antonio Dominguez sat behind a large mahogany desk, his usually warm expression replaced by a grave seriousness. "Mr. Sullivan, Antonio began, rising to shake his hand. I apologize for the intrusion, but a man should know when he's being deceived. Drake was silent for a moment, already dreading the truth that was about to unfold. What's this about? He asked, though he suspected the answer. Antonio gestured to a monitor on his desk. With a few keystrokes, a video flickered to life. Vanessa and Brendan, passionate, entangled in a series of stolen moments. Then clips of the Reed family, discussing Drake in hushed, conspiratorial tones. How much longer until Vanessa leaves him? Norman's voice was clear on the recording, followed by Brandon's cold response. As soon as the divorce is finalized, we've already transferred most of the assets. Drake won't even know what hit him. Drake's blood ran cold. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. The footage continued, showing the Reeds' meticulous plans to destroy everything he had worked for, his restaurant, his family, his reputation, all crumbling before him like a house of cards. One failed inspection. That was all it would take to put an end to Sullivan's grill. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined, but it was the final clip that shattered him completely. A recording from just 3 days ago, Vanessa's voice cool and calculating. The prenup protects everything. By the time I serve him the papers, the family trust will be completely shielded. And the Reeds had planned it all, a calculated takedown. Not just the affair, not just the lies, but the destruction of everything he had built, all to secure the future of a family that had never cared about him. Drake finally spoke, his voice steady, though his insides churned. Why show me this? Antonio's eyes hardened, his jaw set. Judge Reed threatened to have my permits revoked last year when I refused to host a fundraiser for him. My daughter nearly lost her scholarship when she dated a boy the judge deemed unsuitable. The Reeds destroy people who don't bend to their will. Drake nodded slowly, the weight of Antonio's words sinking in. The Reeds destroy people who don't bend to their will. He could feel the fire inside him begin to rise, a slow burn that had only just begun. Thank you, he said quietly, tucking the betrayal deep inside himself. I won't forget this. Antonio hesitated, then offered a small, knowing smile. What will you do now? Drake straightened his tie, the cool mask of control slipping into place. First, I'm going to have dinner with my wife's family. Then, I'm going to make some plans of my own. As he turned to leave, Antonio called after him, his voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. My cousin is the health inspector they mentioned. I'd be happy to make a call. Drake paused, a flicker of a smile tugging at his lips. I'd appreciate that. And please call me Drake. He returned to the dining room, taking a seat beside Vanessa, who looked at him with a nervous glance. The subtle shift in his demeanor didn't go unnoticed. Her smile faltered. Everything okay? She asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Drake raised his glass, his eyes dark with purpose. Never better. Let's celebrate. The quiet hum of Sullivan's grill enveloped Drake Sullivan as he leaned over his desk, eyes tracing the pages before him. His thoughts flickered between the weight of the betrayal he was absorbing and the cold fury that simmered beneath his composed exterior. His restaurant, a sanctuary born from blood, sweat, and sacrifice, had become the very thing that shielded him from the storm now breaching his life. But he wasn't naive. He knew the price of peace. Judge Reed has enemies, Teresa Alvarez said, the ex-prosecutor's voice cutting through the air in the cramped office. People who've been waiting for the right moment to strike. Drake's gaze flickered toward the window, where the night draped the city in darkness. A place he thought safe, where nothing from his past, nothing of his enemies, could touch him. It was just another illusion. It was all part of the game. Let's find them, Drake said, his voice steady, betraying none of the storm rising inside him. The place he had built from nothing, from the ashes of his service in the special forces to the creation of a name that meant something, was now more than just a business. It was his life, his identity. It was the only thing his wife Vanessa hadn't yet managed to destroy, at least not until now. Vanessa's hands had been tainted long before he had started suspecting it. But to face it head on, he had to let go of the hope that there was some part of her he could save. Each passing day, as he made her breakfast, kissed her goodbye, the lie between them thickened. Her late nights, the strange scent that clung to her clothes. He had looked past it for too long, until the moment he searched their home and found it, divorce papers already signed. He could almost hear her voice taunting him. Drake was always just a placeholder. He was nothing more than a pawn to her, something to be discarded once she had what she wanted. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the check he'd slid across the desk to Teresa, agreeing to whatever it took to unravel this dark web. Later, when he met Antonio Dominguez, the weight of his suspicions was confirmed. The health inspection failure had been postponed indefinitely, thanks to Antonio's cousin, a favor that meant nothing if it wasn't for the bigger picture. Judge Reed's running for Senate, Antonio revealed, his voice dropping to a murmur as if speaking louder would summon the devil himself. And the men he's meeting with, let's just say, they're not the sort of people my father would let into this restaurant. A flash of anger flickered in Drake's chest. What the hell have you done, Reed? The connections, the corruption, everything had been set in motion long before he knew. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Antonio's eyes locked with his as the restaurant owner pulled out his phone. I need access to all your security footage, every last clip. Antonio hesitated, but only for a moment. The deal was made, and the next morning, Teresa's presence at the grill was like an omen, her thick file laid out in front of him as she detailed everything that had been lurking in the shadows. Money laundering, shell companies, offshore accounts. And then there was Brendan Walsh, her lover, her accomplice. The photographs, Brendan shaking hands with criminals, the cold gleam of a gun tucked at his side, spoke volumes. But Vanessa? Vanessa, how deep are you in this? Teresa's voice broke through his thoughts. She manages the shell companies, signs the papers, attends the meetings. Her face softened, and Drake didn't miss the hesitation. She had no idea how badly it hurt to hear those words, to realize that his wife, his Vanessa, had been a willing participant in this slow poison of betrayal. And then came the final blow, the revelation of Judge Reed's ties to the Saginaw family, Philadelphia's notorious drug lords, untouchable thanks to their connections in law enforcement. It was madness, the kind of corruption that could destroy a city. A judge working with criminals like that? Career suicide if it were exposed. But it didn't stop there. Drake's blood went cold at the mention of Anthony Reyes, the whistleblower, the man who had vanished days before a crucial trial, leaving behind only silence. The police investigation? A joke, closed within a week for insufficient evidence. Of course, the only evidence was buried under layers of deceit, and the people responsible for his disappearance were sitting in positions of power. One more thing, Teresa said, her voice flat, as if resigned to the weight of her own discovery. I recorded this yesterday. She tapped her phone and the screen lit up with the image of Vanessa and Brendan in a private dining room at Bellini's. Their words were a blade cutting through every illusion Drake had left about the woman he loved. Once Drake's out of the picture, how soon can we make it official? Brendan's hand on Vanessa's thigh, his smug grin, his casual cruelty. Vanessa's voice dripping with disdain. Drake was always just a placeholder until he came back. The pathetic thing is, he still thinks I love him. Drake's vision blurred. The woman in that video, a cold, calculating stranger. His wife. He stopped the video, his face frozen in a grim mask. How much more do we need to take Reed down? He asked, his voice as steely as the resolve building inside him. Teresa's eyes widened, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. You're thinking of going to the authorities? These people have connections everywhere. It's dangerous, Drake. Drake didn't flinch. Not yet, but I will. He glanced at the paper spread before him, his fingers tracing the edges as his plan solidified. How much longer can you keep digging? Focus on the hunting cabin, the Saginaw connection, anything that links Walsh to Reed's empire. Teresa nodded, sensing the shift in his demeanor. I can do that. But Drake, what are you planning? Drake's face revealed nothing. I'm going to give the Reeds a chance to feel the weight of their own crimes. But not yet. I need everything in place first. And with that, he left his office, his mind already moving like clockwork, every step calculated. The Reeds thought they had him cornered, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Drake Sullivan's eyes narrowed as the weight of his plans settled deep in his chest. He wasn't just going to expose them. He was going to tear down everything they had built, until nothing remained but ruin and regret. They thought they could control him. They thought they could break him. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. That evening, Vanessa returned late, her perfume cloying the air, the faint trace of wine on her breath, an indulgence he knew all too well. He greeted her with a kiss, as though everything were as it should be, and placed a steaming plate of pasta in front of her. He played the fool, the oblivious husband, just as she expected. "How was your day?" he asked, lifting his glass of wine in a mock toast. He served her favorite dish, a silent gesture of what was once his role in their marriage. She sighed, slumping into the chair. "Exhausting. Daddy's campaign is demanding so much time," she muttered, her voice laced with false exhaustion. "Understandable," Drake said smoothly, refilling her glass. "Family comes first." Vanessa looked at him then, her expression softening with relief, as though his words were some kind of solace. "Thank you for being so supportive. Not all husbands would be." His smile was warm, tender even, but the darkness brewing beneath it was anything but. "Not all husbands love their wives the way I love you." For a split second, a flicker of guilt crossed Vanessa's face, too fleeting to capture if you weren't looking for it. But Drake saw it. 5 years of marriage had honed his ability to read her like an open book. His eyes narrowed, a silent question hanging between them. "Is something bothering you?" he asked softly. Vanessa blinked, and the weight of his gaze made her pause. "Just thinking about the future," he replied, his voice low, his eyes locked onto hers. "How quickly things can change." The air between them thickened with unspoken words. Drake could feel the lie in her every gesture, the falseness of the woman he once thought he knew. Drake Sullivan hadn't always been the restaurant owner everyone in town knew him as. Before he met Vanessa, his life had been a different kind of war, one fought in the shadows, using intelligence and psychological warfare to bend the will of men to his command. 8 years in special operations had sculpted him into something else entirely. But that life had remained buried beneath the surface, dormant for too long. Until now. Now, alone in his office after hours, Drake cracked open a secure email account, one he hadn't used in years. His fingers moved with practiced precision, typing a simple message to an old commander. Priority level, personal. The reply came swiftly, the message almost too quick to be real. Assets available? Parameters? Drake outlined exactly what he needed: surveillance equipment, secure communication channels, contacts who could move discreetly through financial and legal circles, people who could get to the heart of the Reed family's empire without leaving a trace. By morning, the wheels were already in motion. 2 days later, Kyle Morrison, a former teammate, arrived at Sullivan's Grill. On the surface, he was just another new hire in the kitchen. But underneath that mask of normalcy, Kyle had brought military-grade surveillance equipment and the expertise to use it. "You look soft, Sullivan," Kyle remarked as they set up the devices in Drake's office. "Civilian life treating you well?" Drake smiled tightly, adjusting a miniature camera. "It has its moments." Kyle, always the sharper one, studied him closely. "This isn't just about a cheating wife, is it? The Reed family, judges, connections. Dangerous." Drake's face hardened, the cold calculation he'd hidden for years rising to the surface. "Yes, and once we start, there's no going back." Kyle nodded, his lips curling into a thin smile. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few days, the investigation grew. Kyle bugged Brendan Walsh's car and office, tracking every whisper of movement, every conversation that could give them the leverage they needed. Teresa worked tirelessly, tracing financial transactions, mapping out the Reeds' criminal activities like a spider spinning a web. Antonio Dominguez, a trusted ally, provided access to secure rooms within his restaurant where the Reeds held their secret meetings. Drake, however, maintained his perfect normality with Vanessa, his outwardly supportive behavior a mask that concealed the roiling storm within. He even suggested a weekend getaway, something simple, something to keep her close while he worked. "What do you think?" Drake asked casually as he placed the suggestion on the table. "Your father mentioned his old hunting cabin. It's quiet this time of year." Vanessa hesitated, a flicker of discomfort passing through her features. "Oh, that place. It's so rustic, don't you think? Maybe we should go somewhere a bit more luxurious," Drake pressed, his tone light but insistent. "I've been thinking about getting more into nature, Your father's been promising to take me hunting for years. Vanessa, clearly uncomfortable now, tried to smile. I'll talk to Daddy about it, but he's very particular about that property. Drake took note of her reaction, but didn't press further. No rush, he said, but his mind was already elsewhere. That night, as Vanessa drifted off to sleep, Drake's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Teresa. She had found it, Reyes's vehicle, submerged in a lake 3 miles from the cabin. Coordinates attached. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Drake knew he needed more. Something irrefutable that would crush the Reeds completely. And then, as though fate had conspired to open a door, Vanessa made the announcement he had been waiting for. I'm going to New York with my mother, she said, her voice almost apologetic. It's last minute, I know, but this charity event could do wonders for Daddy's campaign. On the outside, Drake masked his joy with a touch of disappointment. But inside, he was already celebrating. This is it. The moment Vanessa left, Drake contacted Kyle. We have 48 hours, he said, his voice low and urgent. Time to visit the cabin. Kyle arrived with Martin Diaz, a forensic specialist who had worked with him overseas. As they loaded up the equipment into Kyle's SUV, Martin raised an eyebrow. This is highly illegal, Martin warned, glancing at the gear. Breaking into a federal judge's property? Drake smirked. The cabin's in his wife's name. Technically, we're breaking into Marilyn Reed's property. Martin scoffed. Well, that makes it completely fine then. The drive to the Poconos was a quiet one, filled with a tense anticipation. The cabin sat on 20 acres of wooded land, a private road leading up to its secluded doors. Kyle parked a mile away, and they approached on foot, using thermal imaging to confirm the property was empty. The security system was sophisticated, but not beyond their reach. Within minutes, Martin had bypassed it, granting them access. We have 4 hours, Martin said, his voice calm, his eyes alert, before the system pings for verification. After that, the security company calls the owner. Inside, the cabin's rustic exterior betrayed the lavishness within. Expensive furniture, a state-of-the-art entertainment system, a fully stocked bar. Drake moved like a man with purpose, snapping photographs of everything while Kyle set up the surveillance devices in key spots. It wasn't until they reached the study that Martin found something unusual. Check this out, he called from the bookshelf, his fingers tracing small scratches on the edge. Classic concealment technique, Drake murmured, stepping forward. They triggered a hidden mechanism, revealing a secret room behind the bookcase. Inside, they found a computer, file cabinets, and a safe. I need time with this, Martin said, setting up his equipment to crack the security. As Martin worked, Drake and Kyle moved through the cabin. In the basement, Kyle tapped against the concrete floor, his brow furrowing. It's recently poured, he muttered. This area sounds different. Drake knelt beside him, studying the floor. We need ground-penetrating radar. Kyle nodded grimly. If we find what I think we will, this goes beyond simple revenge. Drake's jaw tightened. I know. The radar confirmed their worst suspicions. Something large was buried beneath the concrete. They took detailed readings, but left the floor intact. Disturbing. It was too dangerous. Any disturbance would alert the Reeds. Meanwhile, Martin had cracked the computer's security. You need to see this, he called, his voice tight with the weight of the discovery. Drake approached, his pulse quickening. The files contained everything. Ledgers of bribes accepted, photos of meetings with organized crime figures. Evidence that would shatter the Reed empire once and for all. Drake's fingers paused over the mouse as the video file flickered to life on the screen, its contents immediately sending a chill through him. He hadn't expected the sight to hit him so hard. Anthony Reyes, the whistleblower he had known, bound to a chair, desperate and broken. The image of Reyes's terrified eyes, the ones that had once sparkled with the hope of exposing corruption, now hollow with fear, would haunt him forever. Judge Norman Reed and Brendan Walsh loomed over him, their faces twisted in cold satisfaction as they prepared to interrogate the man. It wasn't just corruption they were indulging in, it was murder, a truth that sat heavy on Drake's chest like an anchor dragging him down into a dark sea of anger. Martin stood beside him, his voice barely a whisper as the scene unfolded, his face pale and his body tense. This goes beyond corruption. This is murder. Drake watched, his hand trembling slightly as he copied the files to an encrypted drive. His eyes never left the screen, absorbing the final damning moments of Reyes's fate. The video stopped. The room seemed to shrink around him, suffocating him with the weight of what he had just witnessed. But there was no time for grief, no room for pity. "We have what we need," he said, his voice steady but cold, devoid of any trace of emotion as he turned away from the screen. The room was restored to its pristine state, just as it had been when they entered, and they left without a trace, the surveillance equipment carefully hidden in plain sight. Their mission in the Reed's lair had been completed with surgical precision, leaving nothing behind but an encrypted file and a promise of justice that would soon follow. Back in Philadelphia, the atmosphere was tense. Drake sat across from Teresa, the legal strategist who had become his unwavering ally. He opened the file, showing her the damning evidence they had uncovered. She studied it with a grim nod. "This is enough to put Reed away for life," she confirmed, her voice sharp and resolute. "Multiple homicides, racketeering, corruption, obstruction of justice, and Brendan Walsh is implicated in everything," Drake added, the name feeling like ash in his mouth. Teresa raised an eyebrow, a quiet caution in her gaze. "What about Vanessa?" Drake paused, letting the silence stretch between them before he played another video file. Vanessa standing at the cabin, bringing food and drinks, while Reyes was held captive in the next room, her face betraying nothing but the quiet complicity of someone who knew exactly what was happening. "She's complicit," Drake said, the words almost a whisper. "They all are." Teresa studied him, her sharp eyes narrowing as she processed the weight of what was at stake. "So what's the plan? FBI, Justice Department?" Drake shook his head. "Not yet. The Reeds have people everywhere. If we act too soon, the evidence will disappear. Witnesses will recant, or worse, vanish. We need to be smarter than that." His plan took shape, deliberate and incalculated. They would continue gathering evidence, pretending ignorance, waiting for the Reeds to make their move. Then, when the time was right, they would strike, hard, fast, and from multiple angles. "The Senate announcement is in 3 weeks, Drake explained, his voice low but firm. "That's when Norman Reed will be at the height of his public exposure. We'll hit them all at once with irrefutable evidence." "That's risky," Teresa cautioned, her brow furrowed. "They're going to try to destroy you before then." Drake's lips curled into a cold, almost predatory smile. "Let them try. Everything they think they know about me is a lie. It's time they learned who they're really dealing with." The night was still when Drake stood alone in his restaurant kitchen, the rhythmic chop of his knife against the cutting board, a soothing sound as his mind raced. Cooking had always been his refuge, a place where strategy and art met. The dish he was preparing, intricate and precise, was a distraction, a necessary one. He needed to think. As he reduced the sauce, his phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. He reached for it, eyes scanning the message from Kyle. "Movement at the cabin. Judge Reed and Walsh arrived 20 minutes ago. Device is transmitting." Drake connected his phone to a speaker and listened intently as Norman Reed's voice, smug and self-assured, filled the kitchen. "The health inspection's back on for Sullivan's restaurant," Reed was saying. "My contact confirmed it. By this time next week, Drake will be facing closure and financial ruin. And then Vanessa serves him the divorce papers." Brendan Walsh's voice chimed in, laced with dark amusement. "Precisely," Reed replied, his laugh cold and ruthless. "She's already moved most of their liquid assets. He'll be left with nothing but debt and a ruined reputation." Drake's lips pressed into a thin line. He could hear the glee in their voices, the belief that they had already won. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know who they were really up against. He turned off the audio, his mind already shifting gears. The Reeds had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated him, thinking him just a man trying to appease his wife's powerful family. But they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, Drake received the official health inspection notice for Sullivan's Grill. The date was set for Wednesday at 10 a.m., 2 days to prepare for a battle that would determine everything. He immediately called Miguel Santos, his head chef, into his office. "We're going to have company on Wednesday," Drake explained, handing him the notice. "Bien. This won't be a normal inspection." Miguel, who had worked by Drake's side since the beginning, nodded grimly. They're coming to find problems, not to ensure safety. Exactly, Drake replied. So let's make sure there's nothing to find. He handed over a list. I need these upgrades implemented immediately. Spare no expense. Miguel whistled at the figure. This is over $20,000. Consider it an investment in our future, Drake said, and keep it quiet. Just tell the staff we're upgrading. His next call was to Kyle, who arrived shortly after with his specialized equipment to sweep the restaurant for surveillance devices. They found three, one in Drake's office, one in the main dining area, and one in the kitchen. Professional placement, Kyle muttered, examining one without removing it. Reason two, Drake replied, his tone unreadable. Leave them. I want them to think their plan is working. While Kyle worked, Drake met with Sophia Bennett, his fierce lawyer who had personal grudges against Norman Reed. She reviewed the divorce papers, her face hardening as she read through them. These papers are egregious, she said, shaking her head. She's claiming everything. The restaurant, your savings, even personal property you owned before marriage. Can she get it? Drake asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Not legitimately, no, Sophia replied, but with her father's influence, she might try. Drake's eyes darkened. I need you to prepare counterfilings, but don't submit anything yet. When Vanessa serves me, I want to be ready to respond immediately. Sophia gave him a curious look. You seem remarkably calm for someone about to lose everything. Drake smiled thinly. Who says I'm going to lose? That evening, Drake invited Antonio Dominguez to Sullivan's Grill for dinner. Antonio, looking worried, leaned in close. My sources say Judge Reed is making moves against you, Antonio said, lowering his voice. The health inspector, Herbert Grossman, is his personal friend. Nothing will pass his inspection. Drake smiled, the expression more dangerous than friendly. I'm counting on that. Antonio looked at him, still confused. You want to fail the inspection? I want them confident in their victory, Drake explained. When people believe they've won, they get careless. Antonio nodded slowly, the weight of Drake's plan beginning to settle in. You're a surprising man, Mr. Sullivan. What can I do to help? Continue letting them use your restaurant for meetings. I need their conversations recorded. Drake paused, his gaze narrowing. And I need one more favor. Your cousin Rico, the legitimate health inspector, can he perform an official inspection tomorrow before Grossman arrives? Of course, Antonio replied. But what good will that do if Grossman is determined to shut you down? Drake's smile was predatory. Documentation. Evidence of bad faith. When we need it. The following day, Rico Dominguez conducted a thorough inspection of Sullivan's Grill, documenting its impeccable condition with photos and a signed report. Drake thanked him, then immediately began implementing phase 2 of his plan. The Reeds were in for a reckoning. The subtle click of the cabin surveillance camera signaled Kyle's latest report. His voice crackled over the line, thick with urgency. Another conversation, Drake? It's worse than we thought. Drake's pulse quickened as Kyle recounted the exchange between Judge Reed and Brendan Walsh, a conversation marked by cold calculations and whispered conspiracies. The Sajena deal closes siege after my Senate announcement. Judge Reed's voice echoed in Kyle's ear, a venomous promise. 20 million funneled through your tech companies, then offshore, they're mine. The waterfront development will be awarded within days. Drake clenched his jaw. They were not only corrupt, they were about to tie the city's fate to one of its most notorious crime families. The price for their betrayal was escalating, and the stakes had never been higher. Later that night, the door creaked open, and Vanessa stepped into the house. There was something in the air, tension that clung to her every move like a shadow. She was late, and the trace of unease in her posture didn't go unnoticed. Drake, careful in his composure, greeted her with a quiet, measured warmth. A glass of wine in hand, he raised an eyebrow. You seem stressed. His fingers worked into her shoulders, gently pressing away the strain. Vanessa's response came out slower than usual. Just campaign pressures. Daddy's announcement is so close and everything needs to be perfect. She shifted, leaning into him slightly, as if the touch could erase the weight of her actions. You've always managed your father's events beautifully. This will be no different, right? Of course, Drake replied, his voice a study in reassurance, even as a deep foreboding knotted in his chest. Vanessa met his eyes, searching. "You've been different lately?" Drake hesitated. "More attentive," he offered, trying to keep the conversation light. Her smile wavered for a second. "Have I been neglectful before?" "Not at all," he replied, feigning innocence. "No," Vanessa hesitated, her lips curving into a practiced smile. "You know I love you, right?" The words came too easily, and Drake caught the flicker of calculation that danced behind her gaze. He could hear the lie, tasted in the hollow sincerity of her tone. Yet he played along, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Of course I know." And just like that, the lie passed between them, unspoken but understood. He had loved her once, with blind devotion. Now all that remained was a cold recognition of her deceit. That night, as Vanessa slept soundly in their bed, Drake's mind was already in motion. He dialed Teresa's number, voice low and steely. "I need everything you have on Herbert Grossman, the health inspector working for Reed." The information came swiftly by morning. Payments made to Grossman from shell companies linked to Reed, a vacation property purchased far beyond Grossman's means, and suspicious inspections that only targeted Reed's political enemies. With this in hand, Drake sent it off to Sophia, his lawyer, instructing her to hold it in reserve for the moment it would be most destructive. Wednesday arrived with an air of quiet anticipation. Grossman, balding, officious, and smirking, strode into Sullivan's grill with the pomp of a man who already knew what the outcome would be. He barely acknowledged Drake's greeting as he began his inspection, eyes narrowing at every minor flaw, flaws that Drake had meticulously planted for just this moment. With a practiced gaze, Grossman ignored the areas that gleamed and zeroed in on the smallest discrepancies. A slightly misaligned tile, a minor fluctuation in refrigerator temperatures, labeling errors. Miguel, the loyal chef, played his part flawlessly, feigning nervousness and mistakes under the inspector's scrutiny. By the end of the 3-hour ordeal, Grossman's clipboard was riddled with violations. "This is unacceptable," Grossman declared with relish, his smile more self-satisfied than righteous. "Significant health code violations require immediate closure pending remediation." Drake's expression faltered only for a moment, but his voice remained steady. "Closure? But we have reservations tonight. Important clients." Grossman's lip curled in a smug smirk. "Not my problem. You can appeal, of course, but the process takes weeks." He produced official closure notices, thrusting them forward like a dagger. "I'll need your keys." With apparent reluctance, Drake handed over the keys to his restaurant, watching as the man slapped the closure notices on the front doors. The moment the man left, Drake's face hardened, the first crack in his calm demeanor slipping away. Within minutes, he called an emergency staff meeting. "I know this looks bad," he addressed his concerned employees, "but I'm asking you to trust me. Everyone will receive full pay during the closure. This is temporary." After calming the staff, Drake stepped into the back alley where Kyle awaited. The surveillance photos were there as air, proof that Brendan Walsh had entered Vanessa's office building that morning. "They're moving faster now," Kyle said, handing over the pictures. "Your wife withdrew another 50 from your joint account today." Drake's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Perfect," he muttered. "Time for phase 2. That evening he returned home, the tension between them palpable. Vanessa greeted him with forced sympathy. "Drake, I heard about the restaurant. I'm so sorry." "It's a disaster," Drake said, his voice heavy with feigned distress. "I don't understand how it happened. All those violations." He allowed a tinge of helplessness to color his words. "I don't understand." Vanessa moved to comfort him, but her body was stiff, her touch stiff as she hugged him. "Maybe it's a sign, sweetheart," she murmured, the suggestion lingering like a cold draft. "Maybe the restaurant was never meant to be your path. You've put so much into it, worked so many hours. Perhaps this is an opportunity to try something new." Drake pulled back, a furrow creasing his brow. "What do you mean?" "Well, she hesitated. Daddy always said you'd be better suited to other pursuits." Drake recoiled, the words landing like a slap. "Your father never believed in me." "That's not true," Vanessa countered quickly, her voice smooth but tight. "He just wants what's best for both of us." Drake turned away, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of it all had finally crushed him. "I don't know what I'm going to do. The appeal process could take weeks." And our savings, Vanessa's hesitation was thinly veiled. About that, she started carefully. I've been meaning to talk to you about our finances. Drake's eyes narrowed. What about them? I made some investments recently, she said, her gaze avoiding his, for our future. Drake's voice rose in disbelief. Where? What about our savings? Vanessa's tone shifted, hardening slightly. It's complicated. Financial matters were never your strength, Drake. I did what was necessary. Drake's anger flared. He paced the room, his chest tightening with confusion. I need to think. I'm going out. Vanessa's voice sharpened. Where? Does it matter? He snapped, his frustration seeping through the cracks. Grabbing his keys, he stormed out. The bar was quiet when he arrived. Teresa was waiting in a corner booth, the latest updates in hand. Grossman filed the official closure report, she confirmed, her face grim. Judge Reed made 3 calls immediately after, one to Brendan Walsh. They're celebrating. Drake nodded, unfazed. And the other pieces? The banking documents are ready. Martin confirmed the evidence from the cabin is securely backed up in 3 locations. Good, Drake said with quiet resolve. Tomorrow, Vanessa will likely serve me divorce papers. When she does, everything accelerates. Teresa's expression darkened. Drake, these people have killed to protect themselves. Are you sure about this approach? Drake's gaze hardened, his resolve unshaken. The Reeds think they're hunters. They're about to discover their prey. The game had only just begun. Vanessa's hand hovered over the stack of divorce papers, her expression an artifice of regret and determination, as though she had rehearsed every word for this moment. She placed them gently beside Drake's untouched coffee cup, her gaze unwavering, as if the decision had already been made in her mind. I didn't want it to come to this, she began, her voice eerily steady. But with the restaurant failing, your recent mood swings, she trailed off, her lips twisting into a semblance of sympathy. We've grown apart, Drake. Drake's eyes scanned the documents, but his focus was elsewhere, caught in the unexpected sting of betrayal. His marriage had been a fortress, or so he'd believed, but here she was, dismantling it in the cold light of morning. 5 years of marriage, he muttered, his voice betraying an edge of disbelief. And you serve me papers over breakfast? I'm trying to be civilized, Vanessa replied, a flicker of something darker behind her mask of composure. My lawyer says this arrangement is more than fair. He skimmed the terms, one-sided, cruel in their simplicity. Vanessa would retain their home, the investments, and alimony, despite her family's vast wealth. And him? He would inherit the weight of the now-closed restaurant's debts. Fair? Drake's laugh was bitter, a sharp edge in the air between them. You're taking everything and leaving me with nothing. You signed the prenup, Vanessa countered, her tone colder than ice. Besides, I'm being generous, considering your limitations. Limitations? Drake's jaw clenched, a fire flickering in his chest. He felt the insult like a slap, but he held his ground. Let's be honest, Drake. You never fit in my world. Daddy tried to help you. He offered you positions in his companies, connections that could have made you something. Instead, you insisted on that little restaurant, working with your hands like some, she faltered, but the disdain was unmistakable. Common laborer. The mask she had worn for years shattered, revealing the true depths of the contempt she'd harbored for him. Drake's pulse quickened, his patience thinning, but he held his composure. I see, he said softly, his voice laced with a quiet venom. And Brandon Walsh fits better into your world, I suppose. Vanessa's expression flickered, a brief moment of unease before the walls rose again. What does Brandon have to do with this? She asked, her tone sharp but defensive. Drake scoffed, the words coming out as if they had been waiting their turn to be spoken. Please, the late nights, the cologne on your clothes, the family celebrations. He took a step closer, a challenge in his eyes. I'm not blind, Vanessa. And she straightened, her eyes narrowing. Brandon is a family friend who understands our world. Whatever you're implying, it's your insecurity talking. You've been moving money from our accounts, he cut her off, voice low but laden with meaning. That's insecurity too. Vanessa's eyes hardened, but she pressed on, her voice dripping with condescension. I protected our assets while you drove your business into the ground. You should be grateful." Drake stood slowly, the air between them thick with tension. He didn't bother to respond to her, simply gathering the papers with a calm that betrayed the fury brewing beneath the surface. He turned to leave, but not without one last piece of ammunition. "I'll have my lawyer review these papers." "Don't bother fighting this," Vanessa warned, her voice cutting through the silence. "Daddy's already spoken with Judge Hamilton. The divorce will proceed regardless." Outside, the world felt distant, unreal. Drake slid into his car, his fingers dialing Sophia without hesitation. "She served them," he said bluntly, a low murmur in the phone, and mentioned her father's conversation with Judge Hamilton. Sophia's voice came through clear, unfazed. "Hamilton's deep in Reed's pocket. We'll need to file for a different judge immediately." "Do it," Drake ordered, his tone final, "and implement the financial countermeasures." His next call was to Kyle. "It's time," Drake said simply. "Activate everything." In the moment, it might have seemed like Drake was spiraling into defeat, but in reality, he had been meticulously preparing for this very confrontation. His response was calculated, a counterattack that would unfold in its own time. 3 hours later, Vanessa received an urgent call from her bank. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Charles Winthrop from First National Trust. There's been unusual activity on your accounts that requires immediate verification." She arrived at the bank in a fury, only to find her access revoked, her joint accounts with Drake locked down, along with several personal accounts. "This is ridiculous," she fumed at the bank manager, disbelief tightening her voice. The manager remained composed. "Actually, Mrs. Sullivan, the accounts in question were flagged for potential fraud. Several large transfers over the past month triggered automatic security protocols. According to our records, you authorized those transfers without your husband's knowledge or consent." Vanessa's mind reeled. "For joint accounts, that's problematic," the manager added, his voice unyielding. Meanwhile, Drake met with Antonio Dominguez in a secure location, the glow of the monitors casting sharp shadows on their faces. Antonio slid the latest recordings from Bellini's restaurant across the table, showing Vanessa's betrayal in real time. "She served him this morning," Antonio said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Vanessa had been telling her father and Brendan Walsh. "He looked pathetic," Antonio continued, "just broken." "Did he cry?" Judge Reed laughed, his voice a cruel rasp. "Nearly," Vanessa replied, satisfaction in her tone. "The best part is, he has no idea about the restaurant sale. Everything is proceeding as planned." Brendan confirmed with a nod. "My company acquires Sullivan's Grill at a bankruptcy auction. We'll renovate and reopen under a new name, establishing another clean channel for the Saginaw funds." The judge's voice lowered, becoming almost a whisper of triumph. "The Senate announcement is in 11 days. Once that's done, and the initial media scrutiny passes, we move the full amount. 20 million through the restaurant, the construction contracts, and Walsh's tech companies." "And the other matter?" Brendan asked, his voice careful. "Being handled as we speak," the judge replied, his tone darkening. "Henderson and Marks will both be removed from the equation before they can testify." Drake paused the recording, his eyes narrowing. "Henderson and Marks, who are they?" Antonio's face was grim. "City inspectors who approved the waterfront development despite environmental concerns. Word is they've been cooperating with a federal investigation." Drake's expression darkened. "They're tying up loose ends before the senator's announcement. We need to accelerate our timeline." That afternoon, Sophia filed emergency motions to contest the divorce proceedings, specifically requesting the removal of Judge Hamilton due to a clear conflict of interest. She also submitted damning evidence of Vanessa's financial misconduct, freezing additional assets pending investigation. At the same time, Drake visited the office of Councilwoman Elaine Porter, a seasoned political rival of Judge Reed. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Sullivan," she said, reviewing the documents Drake had provided. The carefully selected evidence laid bare Reed's corruption, but withheld the most damning truths. "I know," Drake acknowledged, his voice quiet but intense, "and dangerous ones." Porter raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. "Judge Reed has connections throughout the city, including in my office, no doubt." "Why come to me, then?" she asked, her tone a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Because you've stood against him before, Drake answered without hesitation. Because your reputation for integrity is well earned. Drake's voice dropped, the weight of his next words pressing between them. And because the waterfront development he's orchestrating with the Sagan would destroy your district. Porter's eyes widened, her calm demeanor faltering for a fraction of a second. You have proof of Reed's connection to the Sagan? Some, Drake admitted. Not enough for criminal charges yet, but enough to delay the development contracts until a proper investigation can occur. Porter regarded him silently, her mind racing through the implications of the evidence in front of her. Finally, she spoke. Your wife is Reed's daughter. This could easily be interpreted as a bitter husband's revenge. It could, Drake agreed, but the evidence speaks for itself. Review it, verify it, then decide. As Drake left Councilwoman Porter's office, his phone buzzed. It was Teresa, and her voice carried the weight of urgency. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Judge Reed just called in favors at the police department. There's a warrant being prepared for your arrest. Alleged assault on Vanessa. Drake absorbed the news with unsettling calm. She's claiming I hit her? According to my source, Teresa confirmed, she visited the emergency room this morning with bruises. Dr. Landry signed the report. The next phase of the war had begun. Drake's voice was calm, but the weight of his words hit like a hammer. How much time do I have? He asked, the question hanging in the air, cold and urgent. Hours, maybe less, came the reply, low, heavy with the gravity of the situation. Drake, this is serious. Domestic violence charges would destroy your credibility. They'd use it to leverage the divorce. It would give them everything. He nodded, his jaw tightening as the reality settled. It would, he murmured, steeling himself against the looming storm. If I were anywhere, they could find me. The words trailed off, and without further hesitation, he reached for the contingency plan. Implement Plan B. I'm going dark for 48 hours. The disappearance of Drake Sullivan set off a chain of events like a spark to dry tinder, and the Reed family was caught in the firestorm. Panic crept in like a thief in the night. The police arrived at his home, at the restaurant, bearing arrest warrants, but found nothing. No sign of Drake. No clue as to where he had vanished. Meanwhile, Vanessa played her part with cruel precision. Her face, expertly painted to mimic bruises, became the image of an abused wife. She wept in front of the cameras, tears flowing freely as she spoke of the horrors Drake had subjected her to. Judge Reed, his voice booming with righteous fury, condemned his son-in-law to the public, promising that justice would be swift and sure. This violent coward will face the consequences, he declared, his words cutting through the air like a blade. But in the shadows, away from the media frenzy and public outcry, Drake moved. Secure in a location known only to a trusted few, he set his plan in motion. A waterfront warehouse, owned by a shell company he'd set up years ago for just such an eventuality, became his temporary home. Kyle and Teresa, his trusted allies, worked seamlessly, coordinating their moves through encrypted channels. Every action was calculated, every step part of the larger game that Drake had meticulously crafted. The first blow was struck by Rico Dominguez, who filed a formal complaint against Herbert Grossman, the corrupt health inspector. The complaint, detailing the falsified health violations at Sullivan's Grill, triggered an immediate review. The review, in turn, temporarily invalidated the closure order on the restaurant. Next, Martin Diaz accessed the hidden banking records Drake had carefully assembled over the years. These records, damning in their detail, showed Vanessa's systematic theft from their joint accounts. It was explosive material, and it was sent anonymously to the Financial Crimes Division of the Philadelphia Police Department, a unit that, as luck would have it, had no ties to Judge Reed's influence. Finally, Sophia Bennett, Drake's fierce advocate, filed emergency injunctions, freezing any sale or transfer of Sullivan's Grill. The evidence she presented of conspiracy, fraud, and a calculated effort to steal the restaurant from under Drake's nose was undeniable. By the second evening of his disappearance, the Reed family was facing a barrage of unexpected resistance on multiple fronts. In a rare moment of calm, Judge Reed called an emergency meeting at his home. He paced, frustration and anger clouding his usually composed demeanor. "This is unacceptable," he spat, his voice rising with each step. Where the hell is Sullivan, and why are these legal challenges proceeding? My contacts say Judge Hamilton may be recused from the divorce case, Philip Reed interjected, his tone matter-of-fact. Sullivan's lawyer filed evidence of bias. They're using Hamilton's ties to us to paint him as compromised. Vanessa's face twisted in confusion and anger. What evidence? Hamilton's been on our payroll for years, Reed replied, his words bitter. That's the problem, Brendan Walsh added, his voice sharp. Someone sent banking records showing payments from our shell companies to Hamilton. It's not conclusive, but it raises questions. Judge Reed halted mid-pace, his eyes narrowing. What's happening at the restaurant? The closure's been temporarily lifted, Brendan admitted, his voice tight. It's all tied to a health inspector named Dominguez. He filed a complaint against Grossman, citing professional misconduct. Dominguez? Reed's voice grew darker, and his face tightened with suspicion. Antonio Dominguez's cousin? I think so, Brendan confirmed. Why? Reed's lips thinned into a hard line. Dominguez never liked me. Always thought he was too good to support my campaigns. You think he's helping Sullivan? Vanessa asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Reed stopped, his gaze hardening. I think we've underestimated your husband. These aren't random setbacks. This is coordinated resistance. Drake watched it all unfold, his eyes fixed on the surveillance feed with grim satisfaction. The Reeds were beginning to realize they weren't dealing with a broken man. No, this was someone who had carefully planned, who had anticipated every move, and they were only now beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were up against. By the third morning of his disappearance, Drake was ready for the next phase of his plan. Teresa Alvarez delivered a comprehensive file to FBI Special Agent Marcus Rivera. Evidence of Judge Reed's deep-seated corruption, his ties to the Saginaw family, and documentation of the shady waterfront development scheme. Rivera, a seasoned agent, flicked through the papers with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. This is explosive material, he said, his voice low. But why send it anonymously? Why not come forward as a witness? My client fears for his safety, Teresa replied, her tone steady. Judge Reed has already shown a willingness to eliminate threats. You're referring to Anthony Reyes? Rivera asked, his voice darkening. Teresa nodded. My client believes Reed was involved in Reyes' disappearance. The evidence is circumstantial, but compelling. Rivera studied her, his sharp eyes narrowing. This wouldn't happen to involve Drake Sullivan, would it? The restaurant owner whose wife recently accused him of assault? Teresa's face remained neutral. I can neither confirm nor deny my client's identity. Rivera's brow furrowed. Convenient timing. Vanessa Reed accuses her husband of assault, and suddenly we get evidence of Reed's corruption? The evidence stands on its own, Teresa said firmly. Investigate it or don't. That's your choice, but people's lives are at stake. 2 city inspectors named Henderson and Marks, for instance. Rivera's expression shifted. What about them? They may be in danger, Teresa said. Reed considers them liabilities in the waterfront project. After leaving the FBI office, Teresa called Drake. Package delivered. Rivera's skeptical, but he's engaging, especially with the mention of Henderson and Marks. Good, of course, Drake replied, his voice steady with purpose. Is everything ready for tomorrow? Yes, Teresa confirmed. Operation Prodigal Son is set. The next morning, Drake Sullivan walked into the Philadelphia Police Department headquarters. His appearance was flawless, dressed in an immaculate suit, his posture straight, his expression calm. This was no fugitive seeking refuge. This was a man who had a plan. The media, tipped off anonymously, was there in force, their cameras flashing as they captured his every step. Mr. Sullivan, Detective Miles Gardner sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. How kind of you to join us after evading arrest. I wasn't evading anything, Drake replied coolly, his gaze unwavering. I was gathering evidence. He nodded to Sophia, who placed a thick file on Gardner's desk. Evidence that proves Vanessa Reed Sullivan fabricated her assault claims as part of a larger conspiracy orchestrated by Judge Norman Reed. Gardner glanced at the file without opening it, his expression one of feigned indifference. Save it for court, he muttered. You're being charged with domestic assault and battery. No, Sophia interjected firmly. He's not. Not when you review the evidence. which includes security footage from the Sullivan residence. It shows Mrs. Sullivan applying fake bruises the morning she claimed to have been assaulted. Sophia played a short video on her tablet, clearly showing Vanessa carefully applying makeup to create the appearance of bruises. Gardner's face paled slightly. This could be doctored. The original footage has been verified by two independent forensic experts, Sophia replied. Their sworn affidavits are in the file, along with evidence that Dr. Landry, who signed the medical report, received a $50,000 payment from one of Judge Reed's shell companies the same day. Gardner glanced toward the door, his discomfort palpable. This doesn't change the fact that a warrant was issued. A warrant based on false claims, Sophia shot back, her voice ice cold. Sophia's words cut through the tension in the room. The testimony is invalid, she declared, her voice steady but sharp. But by all means, arrest my client. The press conference we've scheduled for noon will be far more dramatic if he's in handcuffs. Gardner hesitated, eyeing Drake, then Sophia, before shifting his gaze to the waiting media outside the interrogation room. A tense silence stretched between them. With a grunt of frustration, he snatched the file from the table. "Wait here," he muttered, his voice thick with reluctant authority, before storming out. Drake turned to Sophia, his expression unreadable. "How long?" 20 minutes, she replied, her eyes cold and calculating. 20 minutes before Gardner calls Reed. Another 20 before Reed realizes the implications. That gives us 1 hour before they mount a counteroffensive. Drake nodded once, his jaw tightening. Perfect. By then, Phase 4 will be active. 40 minutes later, Gardner returned, his face flushed with agitation, the weight of bad news settling on his shoulders. "The charges are being reviewed," he grumbled, his words reluctant. "You're free to go, for now, but don't leave town." Drake offered a polite smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "I wouldn't dream of it, Detective. Philadelphia is my home. I intend to stay for a very long time." As they stepped out of the station, the horde of reporters descended upon them like a storm. Drake appeared momentarily stunned by the frenzy of questions, his innocent facade slipping effortlessly into place. His response was the picture of controlled restraint, a man wrongfully accused, fighting to maintain his dignity. "Mr. Sullivan, can you comment on your wife's allegations?" one reporter called out, microphone thrust forward like a spear. Drake's response was measured, his voice tinged with a quiet confidence. "I can only say that the truth will emerge through proper legal channels. I have great faith in our justice system." Another reporter shouted, "Are you aware that Judge Reed has publicly called for your imprisonment?" He didn't miss a beat. "I have nothing but respect for Judge Reed's distinguished career," Drake replied smoothly, a trace of diplomacy softening his words. "I'm sure once all facts are established, this unfortunate situation will be resolved." His calculated responses, so starkly in contrast with the raw emotion of Vanessa's allegations, wove the perfect narrative, one of a man falsely accused, standing tall in the face of public scrutiny. By the evening, social media buzzed with speculation, many questioning Vanessa's credibility. The tide had already begun to turn. At precisely 3 p.m., Phase 4 activated with a quiet but powerful statement. Councilwoman Elaine Porter, her voice resolute, announced a formal investigation into the controversial waterfront development project, citing grave concerns about its environmental impact and procedural irregularities. Judge Reed, already teetering on the edge of scandal, now found himself engulfed in multiple crises. His daughter's assault claims came under scrutiny, his signature development project was under investigation, and rumors of corruption began to spread like wildfire. That night, Kyle's surveillance confirmed it. The Reeds were in full-blown panic mode. Drake leaned back in his chair, watching the monitor with cold satisfaction. The Reeds were unraveling exactly as he had predicted. "This is a disaster," Judge Reed's voice crackled through the phone. "The Senate announcement is barely a week away, and suddenly we're facing scrutiny from all sides." "Calm down, Daddy," Vanessa urged, her voice a mixture of annoyance and concern. "We still have leverage. The divorce proceedings are stalled because Hamilton was removed from the case." Reed's frustration boiled over, his voice growing sharp. "Don't you understand? Someone is coordinating this. Each attack targets a different vulnerability, systematically dismantling our plans. It's Sullivan." Brendan's voice came through next, grim, but certain. He must have help, obviously. Who and how much do they know? Reed snapped, his gaze hardening as the weight of the situation hit him. A chilling silence descended over the room as the full scope of their predicament began to settle in. What about our arrangement with the Sejinos? Philip asked, his voice edged with anxiety. If the waterfront project stalls, they won't be pleased. Reed exhaled sharply, his voice tense. We need to contain this situation immediately. Brendan, contact Gardner. Tell him to find something, anything, to arrest Sullivan on legitimate charges. Vanessa, maintain your story about the assault. The public loves a victim. Philip, reach out to our media contacts. Start a smear campaign against Sullivan. Criminal history, mental instability, whatever works. And the Sejinos? Brendan pressed, his tone more urgent. I'll handle them, Reed replied, his voice icy with resolve. We accelerate the timeline. Move the money now before additional scrutiny makes it impossible. Drake, for his part, was already steps ahead. He forwarded the recording of their conversation to FBI agent Marcus Rivera, attaching a simple message. The transfer happens tonight, $20 million through accounts listed in the evidence packet. This is your chance to catch them in the act. By midnight, FBI agents were monitoring the accounts involved, tracking illegal transfers as they flowed through the financial web. By 2 a.m., they had documented $15 million in illicit transfers before Judge Reed, sensing trouble, abruptly halted the operation. Drake's plan was unfolding perfectly. The Reeds were reacting exactly as he had hoped, making desperate moves that only dug them deeper into their criminal web. The following morning, just days before Reed's Senate announcement, Drake received an unexpected visitor at Sullivan's Grill. The restaurant, now reopened after Grossman's health inspection was invalidated, had become a fortress of quiet resolve. Antonio Dominguez entered through the back door, his face tight with anxiety. They came to my restaurant, he reported without preamble, his voice low. Reed and Walsh, asking questions about you, about whether I've been helping you. Drake remained outwardly calm, his gaze unwavering. What did you tell them? That I barely know you, beyond professional courtesy, Antonio replied, shaking his head in frustration. But they didn't believe me. Reed threatened my business licenses, said health inspectors would find my kitchen problematic next week. Desperate, Drake muttered, his lips curling into a bitter smile. They're lashing out at perceived enemies. Desperate is dangerous, Antonio warned, his voice tinged with genuine concern. My sources say Reed met with Calvin Sejano yesterday, not with lieutenants, with Sejano himself. This was significant. Calvin Sejano rarely met with anyone in person, preferring to operate through intermediaries. For Reed to be dealing directly with the crime lord was a sign of just how deep they were in trouble. What else? Drake pressed, his mind already turning the new information over like pieces of a puzzle. They're looking for something. Reed keeps mentioning recordings, surveillance. He thinks someone has been monitoring him. Drake's lips tightened into a thin line. They're starting to understand the scope of what they're up against. Antonio's voice dropped to a whisper, full of warning. These people don't just threaten. The Sejanos have eliminated entire families who cross them. I know the risks, Drake assured him, but we're past the point of retreat. The next 48 hours are critical. After Antonio left, Drake immediately contacted Kyle. Remove all surveillance equipment from the Reed properties. They're actively searching for it. Already done, Kyle responded, his voice clipped. But you should know, they've hired private security for the judge's home and Vanessa's apartment. Former military, most likely. Drake nodded. Expect trouble. Implement countermeasures as planned. As if on cue, the phone rang again. This time it was Sophia. The divorce case has been reassigned. It's gone to Judge Caroline Wilson. Wilson? Drake raised an eyebrow. She's known for her strict adherence to legal procedure. Exactly, Sophia replied, her tone triumphant. Reed can't influence her. She's already reviewing our evidence of financial misconduct by Vanessa. She's frozen all contested assets pending resolution. Drake allowed himself a brief, satisfied smile. How did Reed react? Violently, Sophia said with a chuckle. Norman Reed actually yelled at her in chambers. She threatened him with contempt of court. Drake's fingers tightened around the edge of the table as he watched the broadcast unfold on the screen before him. The faint hum of Sullivan's grill faded into the background as his attention fixed on the news anchor. Federal judge under investigation for ties to organized crime. The words were almost poetic in their quiet devastation, each syllable laced with the weight of betrayal. It was better than he'd imagined. Judge Norman Reed's public composure, that meticulously crafted facade, was crumbling under the weight of his own misdeeds. Mistakes were being made, small cracks deepening into irreparable fractures. Drake knew the end was near. As the camera zoomed out from a picture of Reed, barely a shadow of the man he once was, Drake felt an unexpected rush of vindication. His business had been taken through the ringer, the false closure, the legal onslaught, the smear campaigns. But now Sullivan's Grill was filled to the brim with customers, their glances loaded with curiosity, support, and something that might have been sympathy. The scandal had worked in his favor. The vindication had drawn them in. Miguel's voice cut through his thoughts, low and urgent. "Boss, someone's here to see you. Says her name's Gloria Reed." The mention of her name sent a jolt through him. Gloria Reed, the woman who had kept her distance, the quiet figure always standing in the shadows of her more volatile family. She had played the game by the rules, never stepping into the ring where her husband and daughter thrived in their own brand of chaos. Now she was here. "Center of my office," Drake instructed, his voice cool, giving nothing away. Gloria stepped into the room, her elegant form immediately contrasting the palpable tension. She held herself together with practiced restraint, her demeanor clipped but not unkind. It was clear, however, that something in her had frayed. She had always been distant, but now there was something else in her eyes, fear. "Drake," she began, her voice soft, careful, as she accepted the chair he gestured to. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course," he replied with measured neutrality. "What can I do for you, Gloria?" She clasped her hands tightly together, her knuckles pale, a physical manifestation of the grip fear had over her. "This situation, it's spiraling out of control," she said, her words faltering. "Norman he isn't himself, and Vanessa, she's just following his lead, as always." Drake's silence hung between them like a thick fog. He wasn't here to comfort her, nor to waste time on pleasantries. "I know my husband and daughter have treated you terribly," she continued. "The divorce, the false allegations, it's unconscionable. Yet you've said nothing publicly," Drake pointed out, his voice sharp, a needle threading through the thick tension. Gloria flinched, the pressure of the situation pressing against her fragile composure. She exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent 30 years looking the other way, Drake. It was expected of me. But now I'm afraid." Drake leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Afraid of what exactly?" She hesitated, her gaze darting to the floor before she gathered herself to speak. "These rumors about Norman's connections to the Saginos. Do you know what that family is capable of?" "I have some idea," Drake replied evenly, his tone devoid of emotion. Gloria's eyes met his now, a flicker of something, guilt, remorse, passing through them. She leaned in slightly as if to whisper a secret she could no longer keep. "Whatever you're doing, however you're fighting back, you need to stop. For your own safety." Drake studied her, unblinking. "Is that concern for me, Gloria, or fear that your family's crimes will be exposed?" She recoiled just slightly, but it was enough to betray her. "Both, perhaps," she admitted quietly, as if the confession was a weight she'd been carrying for too long. "Norman believes you've orchestrated everything, the investigations, the media leaks, the legal challenges. He's coming for you, Drake. Not just through legal channels." She paused, her voice trembling now. "He's coming for you in ways that go far beyond the law." Drake's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "No," Gloria corrected, the word a soft exhale of defeat. "A warning from someone who has watched Norman destroy people before." Drake didn't move, didn't flinch as she hesitated again, adding, "including Anthony Reyes." Her words fell like a stone into a silent pool, and Drake's pulse quickened, but his face remained neutral. He had been waiting for this confirmation, yet hearing it, knowing it, still stung. "What do you know about Reyes?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Gloria swallowed hard. "Only that he disappeared after threatening to expose Norman," she said, her words empty, too familiar. I don't ask questions when people vanish from Norman's life. Drake's gaze hardened. Willful ignorance is still complicity, Gloria. She turned her face away, her lips pressed tightly together. I know, she whispered, her voice filled with regret. I've told myself otherwise for decades, but I know. She stood then, gathering her composure, as if the weight of their conversation had drained her of every last drop of strength. I can't offer a deal, she said, voice trembling. Norman is prepared to drop everything, the divorce, the allegations, the attacks on your business. In exchange, you cease whatever campaign you're waging against him. Drake's expression remained a mask, unreadable. Did Norman send you with this offer? Gloria hesitated, just long enough to betray the truth. Yes. No, Drake said with absolute certainty, his voice calm but firm. You're lying. Norman Reed would never admit defeat by offering terms. He'd fight to destroy me, regardless of the cost. Please, Drake, Gloria pleaded, her composure finally cracking. If you have evidence against Norman, use it to negotiate. Don't destroy my family completely. The way he planned to destroy me, Drake countered, his voice cold as ice. The way he's destroyed others? Why should I show mercy when none was ever intended for me? Because you're better than him, Gloria said, her voice trembling with something like sorrow. Drake stood abruptly, signaling the end of the conversation. Tell your husband that any deal must start with the truth. The truth about Anthony Reyes, about the Sayajeno connection, about everything. Gloria's face fell, the defeat obvious in the droop of her shoulders. He'll never admit to that, she said hopelessly. Then we have nothing to discuss. As Gloria left, her footsteps echoing in the quiet of the restaurant, Drake immediately reached for his phone. Kyle, he said, voice low, the Reeds just made contact. Through Gloria. They're desperate enough to offer terms. It's time to move forward. Kyle's voice crackled through the line, sharp with curiosity. What are you thinking? That it's time for the final phase, Drake said, his gaze never leaving the window as he watched the world unfold beyond it. Contact Teresa and Martin. We move tonight. While Drake had been laying the groundwork, building his legal and public counteroffensive, Teresa and Martin had been securing the final pieces. Irrefutable evidence, the kind that would bring down the entire empire Reed had built. The forensic team had done their work in silence, extracting samples from beneath the concrete floor of the hunting cabin. Using ground-penetrating radar, they'd discovered human remains, buried deep. The timeline had been pieced together with surgical precision. Judge Reed, Brendan Walsh, and Philip Reed, transporting a heavy wrapped object the night Anthony Reyes disappeared. At 11 p.m., Teresa delivered the file to FBI agent Rivera. Alongside the location of Reyes' submerged vehicle, simultaneously, Kyle was transmitting the crucial details to trusted journalists. By midnight, the FBI was securing the Reed compound, and by 2 a.m. OM, they had emergency warrants for Walsh's penthouse in the Reed family's offices. Drake watched it all from Sullivan's grill, a strange sense of satisfaction stirring inside him as Teresa provided updates. Reed compound secured, judge in custody, she reported. Then Walsh? Drake asked, barely containing the satisfaction in his voice. Arrested at his home. Philip? Attempted to board a private flight. He's been apprehended. By dawn, the headlines hit. Federal judge arrested. Norman Reed faces charges of murder, corruption. Tech CEO Brendan Walsh implicated in whistleblower's death. Senate hopefuls' criminal empire exposed. At 7 a.m., a number Drake didn't recognize lit up his phone. It was Vanessa. The raw emotion in her voice was unmistakable. What have you done? She demanded, the accusation thick with grief. I haven't done anything, Drake replied, his voice as calm as ever. Your father's crimes caught up with him. You orchestrated this. This is your revenge, Vanessa spat. Your father murdered a man, Vanessa. Brendan helped him. They were planning to do the same to others. Did you expect me to ignore that? She paused, her voice breaking. They're saying I was involved. Drake exhaled slowly, his mind already shifting to the next steps. Drake's voice cut through the silence, raw with accusation. About Reyes, were you involved? The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, as if demanding an answer from the very walls themselves. Across from him, Vanessa's eyes faltered. For a long moment, there was only the oppressive weight of the question between them. Vanessa's voice trembled as she finally whispered, "I didn't know they would kill him." The words were fragile, desperate, as if they might shatter the very air around her. "I thought they were just going to scare him." "You knew he was being held against his will," Drake pressed, his gaze unrelenting. "You brought food while he was captive." Another long, taut silence. "How do you know that?" Vanessa's voice was barely audible, laced with fear. "I know everything, Vanessa," Drake replied coldly, his eyes narrowing. "Every meeting, every plan, every lie." His tone was like ice, calculated and final. Her voice broke, turning pleading. "Whatever they're offering, I can give you more. Money, property. I have accounts you don't know about." There was a desperation in her words now, a frantic edge that only fueled the distance growing between them. "I don't want your money," Drake said, his words a quiet storm. "I want justice by Alcohol." "For what?" Vanessa shot back, her anger flaring up, a bitter laugh escaping her. "For a divorce? For a failed restaurant?" Drake's expression remained hard, unyielding. "No, Vanessa. I'm ensuring murderers and criminals face consequences." His gaze never wavered from hers. "Your father and Brendan killed a man. They plan to kill others. They've been corrupting our city, using your family's influence to protect criminals like the Saginos." "You don't understand," Vanessa insisted, her voice a strained whisper. "Daddy was building something important. The Senate position would have given him even more power." "To abuse," Drake interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "It didn't matter to you, Vanessa." Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. "They're coming for me next," she said, the weight of her words sinking into the space between them. "Drake, please, help me for what we once had." For a moment, Drake closed his eyes. He could almost hear the echoes of a time when he believed in her, in the life they had shared, in the vows she had once whispered to him. But all of that had been nothing but smoke and mirrors, a carefully constructed illusion that crumbled the moment he saw the truth. "Goodbye, Vanessa," he said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. And with that, he ended the call, the silence after it almost unbearable. He turned to find Teresa standing in the doorway, watching him with quiet concern. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle, a touch of warmth in the coldness of the room. Drake nodded slowly, exhaling as if releasing a weight he had been carrying for far too long. "It's almost over," he murmured. Teresa gave him a brief, reassuring smile before shifting the conversation. "What's the status on the financial recovery?" "Sophia's team has identified most of the hidden accounts," Drake replied, his voice steady now. "With the RICO charges against Reed and Walsh, asset seizure is already in progress. We should recover everything they took, plus damages." He paused, allowing a small, satisfied smile to flicker on his lips. "And Sullivan's Grill is fully cleared of all allegations. The health department issued a formal apology this morning." A rare flicker of satisfaction crossed Drake's face. "Then we have one final task." That afternoon, he submitted the complete evidence package to the FBI. Security footage from the cabins showing Vanessa's awareness of the captive, financial records documenting her role in the subsequent cover-up, and the recorded admissions from their phone conversation earlier that morning. By evening, Vanessa Reed Sullivan had been arrested as an accessory to kidnapping and murder. As the news coverage flashed across the screen in his office at Sullivan's Grill, Antonio Dominguez entered with a bottle of aged scotch, offering a silent toast. "To justice," he said, pouring 2 glasses. Drake raised his glass, the weight of the moment sinking in. "To truth," he replied quietly. Antonio took a deep breath, his gaze thoughtful. "The Reeds destroyed many lives, not just Reyes." "Yes," Drake said, his voice hardening, "and now they'll answer for it." Antonio studied him curiously. "May I ask you something? When did you begin suspecting them? When did all of this start?" Drake leaned back in his chair, the weight of the question pulling him into reflection. "I had doubts about Vanessa's commitment to our marriage for some time, but I didn't fully understand the scope of it until that dinner at your restaurant, when her family celebrated her relationship with Brendan while I stood watching from the doorway. He paused, his eyes distant, then continued. And the note I sent you changed everything. It gave me proof of what I had only suspected. Antonio nodded thoughtfully. You know, I've owned in Albellini's for 30 years. I've seen many powerful families come and go. The Reeds were among the worst. Entitled, cruel, believing themselves above consequence. They weren't, Drake said, his voice unwavering. Not anymore. No, Antonio agreed, his eyes reflecting a quiet respect. Thanks to you. As Antonio left, Drake remained in his office, staring out at the city as the lights blinked on, one by one marking the arrival of the night. The Reeds had underestimated him, believing him to be nothing more than a hardworking restaurateur, a man desperate to please his wife's powerful family. They had thought him weak, someone without the resources or cunning to fight back. But they had failed to see the man beneath the mask, the strategist, the patient planner, the ruthless enforcer of justice. Their fatal mistake had been believing that Drake Sullivan was the man they had created in their minds, rather than the man he truly was. 6 months later, Philadelphia still grappled with the revelations about the Reed family. The case had unraveled far beyond the murder of Anthony Reyes, pulling back layers of corruption, bribery, and criminal conspiracy that had plagued the city for decades. Drake Sullivan had methodically rebuilt his life. Sullivan's Grill was thriving, its second location already a success. The divorce from Vanessa had been finalized, all assets returned to him, along with substantial damages. His reputation, once tarnished, had been fully restored as the public learned the true extent of the Reed family's crimes. The federal courthouse downtown was a hive of activity, its steps crowded with reporters and photographers. The trial of Judge Norman Reed had entered its 5th week, attracting national attention. A federal judge facing charges of murder, racketeering, corruption, and conspiracy was a rare spectacle indeed. Drake arrived early, taking his familiar seat at the back of the courtroom. Though he was a key witness who had already testified, he rarely missed a session. Teresa slipped into the seat beside him. Prosecution's wrapping up today. Closing arguments are expected tomorrow, she said, settling in. Drake nodded, his attention shifting toward the front of the room. Any surprises expected? No, Teresa replied. Reed's defense is collapsing. 3 more former associates turned to state's evidence yesterday. The courtroom filled quickly, the air thick with anticipation. Vanessa entered with her attorney, her eyes deliberately avoiding Drake as she passed by. She had accepted a plea deal, testifying against her father and Brendan, in exchange for a reduced sentence of 10 years. Norman Reed, the last to enter, was escorted by U.S. Marshals. Once an imperious figure, now he appeared diminished in his orange jumpsuit, but his eyes, those eyes, still burned with hatred. They met Drake's across the courtroom, and for a fleeting moment time seemed to slow, the intensity of the gaze a silent declaration of war. The day's proceedings centered around forensic evidence from the cabin where Reyes had been murdered. DNA, tool marks, and soil samples pieced together a damning timeline. As the recess began, Drake stepped outside for air, his thoughts heavy, the autumn breeze a sharp contrast to the turmoil in his mind. He glanced up to see a familiar figure approaching. Gloria Reed. She had filed for divorce the moment her husband had been arrested. Drake, she greeted him softly. Gloria, he replied, his voice cool but measured. I didn't expect to see you here. I've attended every day, she said quietly, her eyes avoiding his. Penance, perhaps. They stood in awkward silence before Gloria spoke again, her voice barely audible. The prosecution, they'll never forgive him. What he did to Anthony, to all of us. Drake's gaze softened for just a moment. No one is beyond the reach of justice, Gloria nodded slowly, her face a mask of regret. I hope you're right. Drake Sullivan studied Gloria Reed as she stood before him, her expression one of reluctant resolve. I told the truth, she said, her voice steady but quiet. After all these years of looking away, I finally told the truth. The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with regret. Drake didn't answer immediately, his gaze piercing her, seeing the woman who had once played a part in the very corruption that had nearly destroyed him. Unlike Norman, or even Vanessa, Gloria had finally found a semblance of conscience, though it came too late to undo the damage. "What will you do after the trial?" he asked, his tone deliberate, cold. "Leave Philadelphia? Start over somewhere no one knows the Reed name?" She hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I want to apologize to you, Drake, for everything. You weren't behind any of it. I know that now." Drake's eyes narrowed, his lips pressed into a tight line. "No," he corrected her, "but I saw what they did to you. I saw how Norman and Vanessa manipulated things, how they used Brendan." I said nothing. He paused, almost as if contemplating the cost of his silence. "I should have said something." Gloria turned away, and for a moment, silence filled the space between them. Drake watched her, his mind replaying the years of watching her play the dutiful wife to a criminal and turning a blind eye to the suffering that she had, in her own way, been complicit in. She wasn't the architect of the betrayal. No, that was reserved for Norman and Vanessa. But her inaction, her choices had been a piece of the puzzle. She spoke softly, as if to herself. Silence in the face of wrongdoing is its own kind of evil. Drake couldn't argue with that. It had taken him years to come to terms with the fact that sometimes silence was worse than any overt crime. "Take care of yourself, Gloria," he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. Just as she turned to leave, she paused, her voice barely a whisper. "May I ask you something? All those years, pretending to be someone you weren't around our family, didn't it wear on you?" Drake stood still, his hands at his sides. "I wasn't pretending," he replied, the words coming more forcefully than he'd intended. "I loved Vanessa. I genuinely tried to earn your family's respect. That part was real." Gloria looked as though she might say more, but the moment passed, and without another word she walked away, leaving Drake to face the weight of what had been and what might still be yet to come. As the courtroom reconvened, the prosecution's final witness took the stand, Detective Miles Gardner. Drake's stomach twisted. Gardner, once a key player in the Reed family's dirty dealings, had agreed to testify against Norman Reed in exchange for a plea deal. The detective was now a man backed into a corner, his own crimes threatening to swallow him whole. "Please tell the court about your conversation with Judge Reed regarding Anthony Reyes's disappearance," the prosecutor asked, his voice methodical, as if he'd asked the same question 100 times before. Gardner cleared his throat, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "Judge Reed called me directly the night Reyes went missing," he began. "He said there was a situation at his hunting cabin that needed handling discreetly. When I arrived, Reyes was already dead." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the prosecutor urged, "And what did Judge Reed instruct you to do?" "Declare it a missing persons case," Gardner muttered, his voice low. "Make sure the investigation went nowhere. In exchange, he promised me a promotion and a payment of $50,000. As Gardner recounted in grim detail how Judge Reed had used his position to manipulate the investigation, threaten witnesses, and bury evidence, Norman Reed remained eerily silent. His face, as always, betrayed nothing. He sat stone-faced, whispering to his attorney, his gaze never once lifting to meet the eyes of those who had once feared him. When court adjourned for the day, Drake pulled out his phone and checked the message from Kyle. "Package secured, final piece in place." A smile tugged at Drake's lips, but it was fleeting. While the trial unfolded, he had been working quietly, methodically. There was one last element to the plan that had yet to come to light. The hidden accounts that Norman Reed had stashed away in offshore banks, funds soaked in blood money and bribery. No one, not even the federal authorities, had uncovered these funds. But Drake had, through connections, through perseverance. Kyle had tracked the accounts to a bank in the Cayman Islands using their military ties to bypass security measures. The money was already being moved, but not into Reed's hands. Instead, every last dollar was being funneled into a foundation in Anthony Reyes's name, a foundation dedicated to supporting the families of whistleblowers and victims of judicial misconduct. The next morning, as the closing arguments began, Drake found himself oddly calm. The prosecution's case was airtight, the witnesses' testimonies damning. The defense tried to cling to procedural issues in a desperate attempt to discredit witnesses, but it was all for naught, all for naught. The jury, after a mere 7 hours of deliberation, returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Norman Reed stood, his shoulders slumped, his eyes flicking briefly toward Drake, This time, it wasn't hatred that gleamed in his gaze, but a quiet, fearful respect. The realization had finally settled in. He had been outplayed. As the marshals began to lead Reed away, Drake stood at the center of it all, watching the man who had once wielded so much power in the city, now reduced to nothing. Reed's final words were low, filled with a lingering bitterness. "You think you've won, Sullivan? You think this is over?" Drake stepped forward, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of every moment that had led to this. "Justice isn't about winning, Judge Reed. It's about truth." Reed scoffed, a hollow sound that echoed through the courtroom. "Truth? You manipulated evidence, coerced witnesses, orchestrated this entire persecution. I simply ensured your actions came to light." Drake's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "Everything else, the murder, the corruption, the betrayal, that was all you." The color drained from Norman Reed's face as the final blow landed. "I still have resources you can't imagine, friends and places you'll never reach. This isn't over, Sullivan." Drake met his gaze, the finality in his tone unwavering. "Actually, it is. As we speak, your last $15 million in the Caymans is being transferred to the Anthony Reyes Foundation. There's nothing left. No hidden resources. No escape routes. You've lost everything, just as you planned for me." "Impossible," Reed whispered, his voice cracking. Drake turned away, his back straight, his steps resolute. "Goodbye, Judge Reed." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions as they tried to catch Drake off guard. "Mr. Sullivan, how do you feel about the verdict?" Drake paused, considering for a moment. "I feel justice has been served. Not just for me, but for Anthony Reyes and all the others harmed by Judge Reed's actions." A reporter followed up. "Will you be attending Vanessa Reed's sentencing next week?" Drake's response was simple, his voice steady. "No, that chapter of my life is closed." Later that evening at Sullivan's Grill, Drake gathered his closest allies, Teresa, Kyle, Martin, Antonio, and Sophia, together. Their victory had come at a high cost, but tonight was a moment of quiet celebration. "To Anthony Reyes," Drake toasted, his glass raised high. "May he rest in peace, knowing his killers face justice." The others raised their glasses in solidarity, but Teresa's voice cut through the moment of reflection. "What now, Drake? What's next for you?" Drake took in the familiar surroundings of his restaurant, the place that had once been nearly taken from him. "This is enough," he replied softly. "Running my restaurants, living honestly, that's all I ever wanted." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Really? After everything you orchestrated, you were brilliant, man, strategic, relentless." Drake's gaze softened. "That was necessity, not preference," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I'm not interested in power or revenge for its own sake. I just ensure that those who harm others face consequences." His phone buzzed with a news alert. Reed family properties to be auctioned. Proceeds to victims fund. A small smile tugged at Drake's lips. Another piece of the Reed empire had been dismantled, and this time it was being transformed into something good. Antonio raised his glass again, his voice thick with admiration. "To Drake Sullivan, a man who taught Philadelphia's most powerful family that actions have consequences." Kyle grinned. "I'll drink to that." Drake nodded, accepting their toast. But his mind was already elsewhere, contemplating the future. The case against the Reeds had awakened something in him, a new sense of purpose. Not a thirst for vengeance, but a recognition of his ability to right the scales where the justice system had failed. Drake Sullivan sat motionless, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup, the steam curling lazily into the dim light of Sullivan's Grill. The restaurant had flourished since he'd taken it over, 3 successful locations across Philadelphia, each a monument to his resilience, each a small testament to the life he'd rebuilt after everything fell apart. He'd built it all from the ground up, stone by stone, like the walls of a fortress around a fragile soul. Across from him sat Marcus Rivera, FBI's new special agent in charge of the Philadelphia field office. Rivera's fresh title seemed almost a victory lap in itself, earned with hard-won triumphs. Drake's gaze flicked to the agent's lapel for a moment before returning to the man's sharp, calculating eyes. "Congratulations on the promotion," Drake offered coolly, his tone measured but genuine. Rivera's lips quirked slightly, acknowledging the compliment. Thank you. The Reed case opened a lot of doors. Drake raised an eyebrow, allowing a thin smile to curl his lips. I imagine so. Bringing down a corrupt federal judge tends to be a career highlight, he mused, before his tone shifted into something more purposeful. Which brings me to why I asked for this meeting. Rivera leaned forward, a flicker of intensity flashing in his eyes. The investigation didn't end with the Reeds, he said, his voice low, deliberate. We've been pulling threads, following connections. Drake didn't flinch. He simply nodded, encouraging the agent to continue. It was what he expected. Justice always came in waves, and it was never as clean as people hoped. Rivera continued, his words crisp, building momentum. We've uncovered a network, judges, prosecutors, police officials, compromised in ways that echo the Reed case, not just here in Philadelphia, but up and down the East Coast. Drake leaned back slightly, his fingers pausing on the cup. That's not surprising. Norman Reed didn't corrupt the system alone. No, Rivera agreed, his gaze never leaving Drake's. He was just one node in a much larger web. A pause. Drake watched the agent, trying to read the man beneath the confident exterior. Rivera placed a small notebook on the table, the soft thud of it breaking the tense silence. I've been reviewing everything from the Reed case, Rivera said, tapping the notebook lightly, his voice dropping to a quieter, more deliberate tone. The evidence appeared at exactly the right moments. The recordings, the financial trails. It was remarkably thorough. Drake's expression remained unreadable. Good detective work, he suggested, his voice smooth, hinting at nothing. Beyond good, Rivera replied, a slight edge to his words. Almost orchestrated. The faintest shift in Drake's posture, the barest of reactions. He sipped his coffee, carefully masking his curiosity. What are you suggesting, Agent Rivera? Nothing officially, Rivera answered quickly, but his eyes sparkled with something that Drake didn't quite trust. Unofficially, I believe we had help. Someone with resources, skills, and motivation. A sophisticated partner. Drake's eyebrow arched, his interest peaked but controlled. Interesting theory. Rivera slid the notebook closer, tapping it gently, his fingers brushing the edge of the pages. More than a theory, he corrected. 3 months before Reed's arrest, we detected unusual electronic intrusions. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, just information accessed. Banking records, property deeds, sealed court documents. Drake's lips thinned. Sounds like you have a security problem. No, Rivera replied, leaning in slightly, his voice even more confidential. We had a vigilante problem. Someone working outside official channels, gathering evidence we couldn't legally obtain. A slight flicker of realization crossed Drake's face, but it was gone before it could be noticed. And yet you used this evidence to convict Reed once it came to you through legitimate channels. Yes, Rivera affirmed, a glint in his eye. The question is, who had both the capability and the motivation to execute such a complex operation? Drake spread his hands and feigned innocence. I'm just a restaurateur, Agent Rivera. Rivera's smile was thin, almost mocking. Are you? He challenged. Your military record suggests otherwise. 8 years in special operations, commendations for intelligence work, psychological warfare expertise. You left all that behind, did you? Drake's expression didn't waver. He met the agent's challenge with the same cold calm he'd cultivated over the years. I left that life behind when I met Vanessa. Did you? Rivera's voice was low, almost insinuating. Or did you just bury those skills, waiting for the moment they would become necessary again? A brief silence hung between them, charged with unspoken words. Drake said nothing, his gaze steady. Rivera leaned back, his posture relaxing but his tone still sharp. What exactly do you want, Agent Rivera? Officially, Rivera began, his voice steady. Nothing. Reed's in prison. Justice was served. He let the words hang in the air for a moment before adding, unofficially, I want to understand my anonymous partner better. Drake's eyes narrowed slightly, the weight of the statement sinking in. And if this hypothetical partner existed, what would happen to them? Rivera's gaze was unwavering, a subtle challenge in his eyes. Nothing. The methods may have been unorthodox, but the outcome was just, more than just. It was necessary. Reed would have slipped through conventional law enforcement. Drake considered this, his mind working quickly, carefully. You believe they're still active? Rivera leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a whisper. I believe someone with their skills and moral compass wouldn't stop after just one case. Not when there are still others like Reed out there. Untouchable. Corrupt. Drake didn't respond immediately, his silence thick with contemplation. Rivera continued, pressing on. 3 months ago, Judge William Meharob in Boston was exposed for taking bribes. 2 months ago, District Attorney Peter Cowell in Baltimore was linked to witness tampering. Last month, Police Commissioner Frank Daniels in Washington, D.C. was implicated in evidence suppression. Rivera paused for effect. All cases built on evidence that appeared through unusual channels. Drake nodded slowly, a quiet understanding in his eyes. Sounds like justice is being served, he said neutrally, his voice even. It is, Rivera agreed, his tone edged with something like respect. In ways the system itself sometimes fails to achieve. Drake's eyes locked with Rivera's, steady, unwavering. Why tell me this? Rivera leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to a near whisper. Because some of us inside the system recognize its limitations. We understand that justice sometimes requires unconventional approaches. Are you proposing cooperation, Agent Rivera? Drake's voice was sharp, probing. Rivera shook his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. I'm acknowledging a reality, he clarified, and perhaps suggesting that if your hypothetical partner ever needed assistance, information, access, protection, there are those within the Bureau who might be able to help, discreetly. Drake absorbed the agent's words with careful deliberation. Hypothetically speaking, that could be valuable, he said finally, the weight of the offer not lost on him. Rivera stood, smoothing the front of his suit. Hypothetically, he agreed, nodding toward the door. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Sullivan. Drake's gaze followed him as the agent left, his mind turning over the implications of the conversation. The offer was unexpected, but in the right circumstances, it could prove useful. He leaned back in his chair, staring into the half-empty cup in front of him. The work had continued, of course. The Reed case was only the beginning. There were others just as corrupt, just as untouchable, each one meticulously exposed through methods that wouldn't hold up in a courtroom, but would trigger the investigations the system could not. His phone buzzed and he glanced at the message. Boston package delivered. Response positive. Another corrupt judge exposed. Another small victory for justice. Drake didn't smile, but there was purpose in his chest, a warmth that came from the knowledge that his work was not for power or revenge. It was for restoration, using the skills that had once made him an asset to the military to now serve a kind of justice that the system itself couldn't. He was deep in thought when Miguel approached, the young chef's voice cutting through his contemplation. Boss, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. Drake glanced toward the bar where a woman stood, mid-30s, professionally dressed, her eyes filled with the careful calculation of someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. She approached, her voice clear and cautious. Mr. Sullivan? Drake rose, nodding slightly. How can I help you, Miss Winters? She hesitated before sitting, leaning in slightly as if to speak only to him. This is sensitive, she murmured, her voice dropping even lower. Claire Winters' voice quivered slightly, though her posture remained upright, rigid with desperation restrained beneath professionalism. Unorthodox, I know, but a mutual contact insisted I reach out. Agent Marcus Rivera said you might understand my position. Across the table in the shadowed corner of Sullivan's grill, Drake Sullivan's expression remained unreadable. Not indifferent, never that, but steady, like granite worn by storms. I'm working a case, he said evenly, against Superior Court Judge Richard Garrison. Racketeering, judicial misconduct, possibly worse. Claire's fingers tightened around her water glass until the condensation smeared under her grip. Her next words fell hard, chipped from years of frustration. The evidence keeps vanishing. Witnesses retract their statements and nothing ever sticks. Nothing. Her composure cracked just slightly, revealing a simmering fury beneath the surface. It's more than frustrating, Mr. Sullivan. It's obscene. Garrison has turned justice into a commodity, sold to the highest bidder for decades. Children return to violent homes because their abusers had the funds. Rapists and killers released. Their records scrubbed clean with the stroke of his pen. Every oversight mechanism, internal affairs, judicial review, even the feds, has been blocked or rerouted. He's untouchable. She leaned in, eyes sharp with conviction. 2 weeks ago, my key witness was found dead. Suicide, they say, but he'd just closed on a second home in Lake Placid and was negotiating contracts for his daughter's wedding venue. He wasn't suicidal. He was silenced. Drake gave a slow nod, betraying no surprise. He'd heard echoes of this before. He knew that kind of quiet power, the kind that eliminated threats without leaving fingerprints. Why come to me? I'm not law enforcement. Claire hesitated. Agent Rivera said, you know how to level playing fields when the system is compromised. A pause. Drake studied her. Did he now? His tone remained smooth, but the flicker in his eyes hinted at the calculation already unfolding. I've spent 5 years chasing this man, Claire said quietly. 5 years watching Garrison ruin lives with impunity. I have no more illusions about the system, but I still want justice. Drake leaned back, considering. This wasn't a vendetta, not like Reed. Claire was no idealist. She was a realist exhausted by integrity, but not broken. Tell me everything, he said. Every pattern, every lie, every life he's wrecked. For the next hour, in the hush of the private booth, Claire unraveled the dark empire of Judge Richard Garrison, his labyrinth of offshore accounts, his ties to organized crime families and their lawyers, his strategic use of shell companies and forged rulings. She painted the picture of a man who wielded a courtroom like a guillotine, cutting deals in the margins while cloaking himself in the dignity of the bench. At last, she slid a flash drive across the table. This is everything I've compiled, through official channels and otherwise. It's not enough for a conviction, but maybe enough to start. Drake pocketed it. I'll look into it, Miss Winters. That's all I'll promise. Relief softened her face for the first time. Thank you. Truly. After she left, Drake descended into the depths beneath Sullivan's grill, into the hidden operations room, where polished metal gleamed beneath warm ambient lights and no scent of food ever reached. He activated the systems, loaded the drive, and began the audit. The evidence was dense but elusive. Money trails lost in offshore fog, rulings written in careful ambiguity, digital shadows of vanished truths. He contacted Kyle Morrison next. We've got a new target. Harrisburg, Judge Richard Garrison. Kyle let out a dry breath. Another one? You're building a collection. This one's different, Drake replied. We've got someone inside, a prosecutor. Claire Winters. Risky, Kyle warned. Can she be trusted? She'll be vetted. But if her data holds, Garrison falls, like Reed did. That night, Claire's files illuminated Drake's screens, transactions buried beneath shell companies, case logs with improbable outcomes, meeting records with known felons. Still circumstantial, dangerous, but enough to act. He initiated protocols. Kyle conducted background and tactical surveillance. Teresa Alvarez began dissecting legal patterns. Martin Diaz launched deep forensic digs into Garrison's digital footprint. By dawn, Claire's record was confirmed. Tenacious, methodical, and clean. Garrison, by contrast, was riddled with rot. Properties bought through fake entities, discreet meetings with criminal associates, judicial decisions serving invisible masters. The team convened beneath the restaurant's warm clatter upstairs, in the war room of quiet resolve. Garrison's careful, Teresa noted, scrolling through files. He's learned from Reed's downfall. Nothing blatant, just shadows. Everyone leaves a trace, Drake said. We just haven't found his. Martin scrutinized the banking architecture. Sophisticated laundering. He's got professionals covering for him. Then we focus on the cases, Claire interjected, back in the room with them now. An insider turned informant. Cross-reference the rulings with his likely beneficiaries. Find where the cash overlaps the justice. Weeks passed. Drake maintained his civilian front, managing the restaurant by day, orchestrating quiet warfare by night. Surveillance nodes blinked into life at key locations. Phone taps whispered across encrypted channels. Court schedules were dissected. Patterns emerged. Then a fissure in Garrison's fortress. A name, Elaine Matthews, court reporter, a fixture in all his most sensitive cases. She's always assigned to the controversial rulings, Teresa said, eyes narrowing, even when schedules had to be reshuffled to fit her in. The deeper they dug, the clearer her role became, a quiet manipulator of the official record, the gatekeeper of what would and wouldn't enter history. Her bank account betrayed her. A recent real estate purchase in the Bahamas, absurd on her salary. Phone logs revealed regular after-hours calls to Garrison. She's the fail-safe, Drake said. If something inconvenient gets said in court, she erases it, adjusts it, dresses it up. Rather than target Garrison directly, they pivoted. Kyle began tailing Matthews, capturing footage of private meetings. Martin decrypted her cloud storage, finding payoffs filtered through Garrison's same network of ghost companies. Claire supplied the rest, court calendars, restricted access, insight cloaked in deniability. 3 months in, they had what they needed. Audio of Garrison instructing Matthews to revise testimony, transfer logs, coordinated schedules, an entire network of corruption exposed. "We're ready," Drake announced. This time there would be no public crusade, no fiery confrontation, just a silent detonation. Evidence was dispatched, simultaneously anonymously, to Internal Affairs, the press, the Office of the Inspector General. Judge Richard Garrison would waken to find himself cornered on all sides, the walls of power now made of glass. And for the first time in years, Claire Winters would watch justice begin to stir from its long, bitter sleep. "What brings you to my doorstep after hours?" he asked, stepping back just enough to let the faint gleam of interior lighting frame him in the restaurant's doorway. Maxwell Carter approached with the casual grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and bending narratives. "A personal conversation, Mr. Sullivan," he said smoothly. "No cameras, no aides, just two men with overlapping interests." Drake gestured toward a quiet corner booth inside, one that offered both discretion and a clear line of sight to all exits. Carter slid into the seat with the ease of a man who had never doubted his welcome. Drake joined him, his posture relaxed but his senses coiled, listening for threats in the pauses between words. "You've built quite an empire here," Carter remarked, eyes scanning the elegant wood paneling, the photographs of smiling patrons, the burnished glow of success. "Philadelphia respects you. The culinary scene adores you. And yet, beneath all this civility, there's a current, something deeper." Drake tilted his head, feigning mild curiosity. "You sound almost poetic, Senator. That your speechwriter talking?" Carter chuckled, then leaned forward, voice dipping into something confidential, intimate. "I think we both know appearances are rarely the full story. I came tonight not as a senator, but as a man who understands systems, how they work, how they break, how some men fix them when no one else will." There was a long beat of silence. Drake let it stretch, controlled and quiet, like a chess player calculating multiple moves ahead. Finally, he said, "And what exactly are you proposing, Senator?" Carter's gaze didn't waver. "An alliance. Strategic. Discreet. I know what you've been doing, Sullivan. Maybe not every detail, but enough to recognize a pattern. Judges, inspectors, prosecutors, one by one the corrupt fall, but not in random collapse. In symmetry, design. You're restoring something. Balance, justice." Drake's face betrayed nothing, but inside the revelation sharpened his focus. So Carter did know, or believed he did, and he was framing it not as a threat, but an opportunity. "I admire your imagination," Drake said at last, voice steady. "But you're painting with shadows. I'm a chef. I run restaurants." Carter offered a thin smile. "And I'm a senator advocating reform while sipping bourbon with billionaires who fund private prisons." We both wear masks, Mr. Sullivan. The quiet between them was no longer casual. It buzzed with latent energy. Carter wasn't here to expose Drake. He wanted in. You were close to Norman Reed, Drake said, carefully modulating his tone. I was, Carter admitted. But I walked away. Before his fall, before the trials, I saw where it was headed. I learned from it. Drake narrowed his eyes. Or you helped build the machinery and decided to disavow it when it became inconvenient. Either way, Carter replied smoothly, I know how it works, and I know it needs dismantling. You've been doing that, piece by piece. I could help. Resources, access, protection. With the right cooperation, your mission could expand nationwide. Drake leaned back. He studied Carter, not the polished surface, but the ambition behind the pitch. Was this redemption? Opportunism? Insurance? You assume I want this to expand. Carter's gaze hardened, just slightly. The system doesn't stop at state lines, neither should justice. It was a compelling argument. Drake knew firsthand the rot wasn't confined to Pennsylvania. But forming a partnership with someone so steeped in political calculus could be the very compromise that unraveled everything. I'll think about it, Drake said. Not a commitment, not a refusal. Carter accepted the ambiguity with grace. That's all I ask, but think quickly. The next phase of your work, whatever it is, will attract attention. You won't be able to do it alone forever. He stood, buttoned his coat with practiced flair, and extended a hand. Drake shook it, firm and unreadable. Good night, Senator. After the door closed behind Carter and the taillights faded into the rain-slicked street, Drake stood in silence for several minutes. Then he pulled out his phone. Kyle, I know, he said when the call connected. We need a full background sweep on Carter. Every donor, every trip, every associate. No exceptions. Teresa's message came in moments later. Matthews has flagged a new name in one of Garrison's sealed case files. It might be connected. The storm was gathering again, but Drake Sullivan had long since stopped fearing thunder. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind them, darkness embraced the two men like a shroud of intent. Drake Sullivan moved without hesitation, his frame lit by the dim amber glow of low-hung bar lamps as he gestured silently toward the counter. Scotch, if you have it, came the smooth reply from Senator Maxwell Carter, his voice balanced on the edge of formality and familiarity. Drake's footsteps were quiet against the old wooden floor of Sullivan's grill. He reached behind the bar, retrieving a bottle of single malt aged long enough to command respect. As he poured, the men watched each other, not with idle curiosity, but the silent precision of predators circling uncertain prey. Neither blinked. Neither smiled. The glasses clinked lightly, a brittle truce in crystal. Carter took a sip, eyes never straying. You've built something extraordinary, he said. 5 restaurants across 3 states in just 3 years. Dio, quite the resurgence after what the Reeds did to you. Drake's response was measured, unadorned. Hard work pays off. It does, Carter agreed, his gaze steady. Norman Reed taught me that. He also taught me how to detect patterns, see threats others miss. He swirled the scotch slowly. It's a critical skill in politics. In many fields, Drake replied coolly. Carter leaned forward just slightly. And I've noticed a rather compelling pattern lately. Over the past 3 years, everyone tied to Reed, judges, prosecutors, high-ranking officers, has been systematically dismantled, one by one. Evidence appears as if conjured. Testimonies surface just in time. Anonymous sources drop digital trails that, by all rights, shouldn't exist. Justice catching up with corruption, Drake offered, his expression unreadable. Sounds like progress. Progress, Carter echoed, smiling faintly. But too precise to be coincidental. You and I both know the system doesn't move that cleanly on its own. Someone's been steering it. Drake set down his glass. The weight of silence lingered a beat too long. Why bring this to me? Carter's eyes sharpened. Because I think that someone is you. Drake didn't flinch, though his mind narrowed like a lens. That's quite a theory, isn't it? Carter's voice lowered, now taut with gravity. A restaurateur dismantling a judicial corruption empire. It would be unbelievable. Unless that restaurateur had 8 years of special operations experience, extensive training in intelligence and psychological warfare, and a very personal motive to destroy everyone linked to Norman Reed. Still, Drake gave nothing away. And even if you were right, why come here? Why confront me directly? Because I'm not here to threaten you, Carter said, voice now as focused as a scalpel. I'm here to hire you. Drake's brow twitched, the first crack in his composure. Excuse me. I need your methods, hypothetically, of course, Carter said. I'm pushing legislation to root out systemic corruption. Real enforceable oversight. But powerful enemies are trying to kill the bill. People protected by the same networks Reed once cultivated. And you want what exactly? Evidence. The kind I can't obtain through legal channels. Surveillance, digital trails, whistleblower accounts. I need the ghost you command. Drake studied him in silence. You were Reed's protege. I was, Carter admitted, until I saw what he really was. He groomed me carefully, introduced me to men he trusted, eased me toward compromise. I played along, but I was documenting everything, preparing to take it all to the feds. Then you exposed him. You accelerated the collapse. Drake gave no answer, only a stillness that bordered on silence. So what are you offering? A partnership, Carter said. You bring the tools, the tactics. I offer access, intelligence, protection. Together, we dismantle the structures protecting corrupt lawmakers. It's a dangerous game. High risk, higher reward. Drake let the silence breathe again, weighed the proposition with the caution of a man who'd buried too many friends to move lightly. I'll need time. Of course, Carter stood, smoothing his jacket. Take all the time you need. But know this, I meant every word. As soon as the senator vanished through the door, Drake activated silent protocols. Sullivan's Grill became a fortress. Kyle Morrison initiated encrypted sweeps of Carter's background, while Martin Diaz combed through private communications and financial patterns. Teresa Alvarez traced political affiliations, whispers from dark corners of power. For 2 weeks, the team worked tirelessly. What emerged was a portrait of paradox. Maxwell Carter, a man of ambition who had stood against his own party to champion an independent oversight commission with teeth sharp enough to draw blood. This bill threatens the core of their influence, Teresa reported during a secure meeting deep underground. They're terrified. 7 representatives, 3 senators, Kyle added, all actively sabotaging the bill, all with shady financial ties. Martin displayed the evidence, emails, wire transfers, metadata. Carter's private stance matches his public one. He's been laying groundwork for this for years, well before Reed fell. Drake nodded slowly. So it's not a trap. He's legit. He wants to weaponize us. And if we agree, Teresa warned, we're no longer a shadow. We become a weapon of open war. But a weapon with reach, Drake said, and precision. The next meeting was far from public. A hidden room beneath Sullivan's Grill, part safe house, part command center, lit with discreet monitors and low hums of encrypted machinery. Carter stepped inside, visibly impressed. Quite an operation for a restaurateur. Purely hypothetical, Drake said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. But before we continue, I need one thing clear. If this is a trap, if you're playing both sides, it ends badly, for you. Carter met his gaze without flinching. It's not. I want results. And I think you're the only one who can deliver them. Drake considered the senator's words, every syllable, every silence. And then, slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand. The glint in Drake Sullivan's eyes was steely, unwavering. A fire stoked not by fear, but by certainty. If anything happens to me or my people, he said, his voice low and deliberate, everything I know about everyone, including you, goes public. No exceptions. Senator Maxwell Carter inclined his head, the weight of the statement settling between them like a drawn blade. Understood, he replied with a grave nod, and I'd expect nothing less. But this isn't a trap, Drake. It's an opportunity. One that could let us both do far more good than we ever could alone. Drake didn't answer immediately. He studied Carter, scanning not just his face, but his intent, as if peeling away layers of political polish and to find the man underneath. A long breath, then a slow nod. Fine, let's talk terms. Their alliance began like an uneasy truce in a war zone, careful, calculated, and bound by mutual suspicion. Information was exchanged in measured doses, and every detail Carter provided about corruption on Capitol Hill was independently verified by Drake's team before a single move was made. Their first target, Senator William Henderson of Ohio, the thunderous voice of opposition against Carter's anti-corruption bill. Drake's people, Teresa Alvarez with her legal precision, Martin Diaz's forensic wizardry, and Kyle Morrison's quiet, lethal thoroughness, peeled back Henderson's life like layers of rot. They uncovered a nest of bribes funneled from corporations terrified of losing influence under Carter's reforms. The evidence was a masterpiece of subtlety, airtight, untraceable, and damning. It toppled Henderson like a rotten pillar, culminating in a federal indictment just 2 months later. The public trembled. Congress listened. Carter's legislation, once smothered by committee apathy and corporate whispers, surged forward with newfound momentum. One success led to another. One rotten name after the next, prosecutors, lawmakers, bureaucrats, unspooled in a quiet reckoning. Each takedown deepened the trust between Drake and Carter, gradually widening the scope of their operations from surgical strikes to structural dismantling. What had begun as a shared vendetta became a calculated crusade. A year passed. Drake sat alone in the back office of Sullivan's Grill, watching the live broadcast of the bill's signing. The president's pen scratched across paper, birthing a commission with real claws. An independent watchdog, free to investigate the powerful without bending to politics. As the crowd applauded on screen, Drake felt something strange stir in him. Not vengeance, not satisfaction, but something more elusive. Systemic change. Justice that endured. Later that evening, Carter arrived at the restaurant unannounced, stepping into the warm hum of conversation and clinking glasses. He raised a toast before Drake and his inner circle. "We actually did it," he said, the light from the bar catching the rim of his glass. "Real reform, with real teeth." "Something Norman Reed and his ilk thought impossible," Teresa said, half smiling. "It's a beginning," Drake replied. "The commission will be tested, undermined, attacked." Carter nodded. "That's why we keep pushing. The law gives us weapons, but it still takes people to wield them." Drake's gaze hardened, but there was resolve behind it. "We've compiled files on 37 more. Judges, prosecutors, lawmakers, 12 states." Carter raised his eyebrows. "Ambitious and necessary," Teresa added. Kyle lifted his glass. "To justice, without shortcuts or mercy, and to the man who reminded us some predators become prey." Drake acknowledged the tribute with a nod, but his thoughts were already racing ahead. The war was far from over. The celebration, though earned, would be fleeting. When the others had drifted away, Carter remained behind. He lingered, eyes heavy with contemplation. "You know," he said, voice softer now, "when I first approached you, I thought I understood your motivation. Revenge against the Reeds. But it's more than that, isn't it?" Drake met his gaze. "It started there, but it evolved. I saw what unchecked power does. And I realized, if no one holds them accountable, they just keep breaking things. And you made yourself the reckoning." Drake didn't flinch. "Someone had to." Carter looked away for a moment, then back. "Just be careful. Shadows can consume the man who walks too long in them." Drake allowed a faint smile. "That's why I have my team. Teresa, Kyle, Martin. They'll stop me if I go too far." "Good," Carter said, standing, "because I've seen what happens when someone starts believing they're above the law. It never ends clean." 2 weeks later, a message arrived, unlooked for, unwanted, a request for a prison visit. Vanessa Reed Sullivan, 5 years into her 10-year sentence, had broken her silence. Drake hesitated. Vanessa had betrayed him on every level, emotionally, morally, tactically. She had aided her father's grotesque operations. She had helped cover murder. She had sacrificed innocent lives to protect her family's empire. She had earned her punishment. Still, he was curious. What could she possibly want now? The drive to the federal women's correctional facility was long and cold, the kind of journey that encourages regret to whisper in the back seat. But Drake arrived on time, surrendered his phone, and was led through a gray labyrinth of security. Vanessa sat alone at the metal table, shoulders slightly hunched. Prison had taken its toll. Her elegance was stripped away, leaving only bones and resignation. Her eyes, once calculating, confident, were muted now, almost hollow. "Drake," she said as he sat, "thank you for coming." He offered no reply. She shifted under his silence. "I've had time to think, to see who I really was." He waited. "I wanted to apologize," she said at last, her voice quieter than he remembered. "Not to change anything. I know I can't, but it needed to be said. I was wrong about everything. What I did to you, what I helped my father and Brendan do." Drake studied her carefully, peeling her words apart in his mind. "Why now?" he asked. 5 years of silence, and now suddenly remorse? She didn't flinch. "It's not about absolution. I don't deserve that. I just needed you to know I understand now. What my family really was. What I became part of." "No," Drake said coldly. "You always understood. You made choices. Clear, conscious choices. You brought food to a man your father was torturing. You helped hide his murder." Vanessa lowered her eyes. "Yes, I did. And I can't undo it." "Then what do you want from me?" She looked up, straight into his eyes. "My mother," she said. "No one tells me anything, but I've heard whispers that she left the country, changed her name. I need to know." Drake hesitated, then gave her the truth. "Gloria's in New Zealand. After your father's conviction, she disappeared, changed her name legally. She severed all ties. She wants no part of her old life." Vanessa blinked, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." The silence between them stretched, heavy with unfinished reckonings. Drake stood. He'd heard what he needed, given what he chose. And whatever remained in Vanessa's heart was hers to carry alone. She hesitated before speaking, the words trembling on her lips like a fragile truce. Is she okay?" Vanessa asked, her voice soft, almost too soft for the sterile air of the prison visitation room. Drake didn't flinch. He met her gaze with a practiced calm, eyes unyielding. "She's rebuilt her life," he said, each word clipped and precise. "She works with survivors of domestic abuse now. Atonement, perhaps, or penance." Vanessa's composure cracked, just slightly. A tremor of something unreadable passed through her face, a ripple of remorse, maybe even envy, gone before it settled. "And the others?" she asked. "Brendan Walsh," Drake said, not missing a beat, serving his sentence in a maximum security facility after trying to bribe his way out of the previous one. Desperation doesn't wear well on him. Vanessa blinked. "Philip?" "Released last year," Drake replied. "Completed a reduced sentence. He works in a warehouse in Oregon now, under his mother's maiden name, trying to disappear." "You keep track of all of them?" she murmured. "I keep track of potential threats," he corrected, his voice clinical. Vanessa exhaled, slow and controlled. "And that's what I am to you now, a threat. Are you suggesting you're something else?" She didn't answer right away. Her silence said more than words. "No," she finally admitted. "Whatever I was, I gave it up the moment I chose betrayal over loyalty. I forfeited my place in your life long ago." She hesitated, gathering resolve. "There's one more thing. I'm eligible for parole next year. If I'm granted release, I'll be relocating to California. You won't have to see me again." Drake studied her with the same detachment he'd once used to inspect invoices or analyze surveillance reports. "Is that meant to comfort me?" he asked, voice flat. "It's just information," she replied. "You have a right to know." "I already do," Drake said. "I've seen every page of your case file, therapy logs, behavior reports, your parole eligibility. Nothing surprises me, Vanessa. Not anymore." She was visibly shaken for a breath, then folded into resignation. "Of course, you've always been 3 steps ahead." There was a silence between them, thick, measured, filled with ghosts. Then quietly, "Will you oppose it, my parole?" Drake leaned back slightly, weighing her a question. 5 years ago, his answer would have been swift, merciless. He would have moved mountains to ensure she rotted behind bars. But now with his focus shifted to dismantling entire power structures, she was no longer a central figure, merely a remnant of a previous life, a wound that had long since scarred over. "No," he said finally. "Your fate will rest on your actions. If the parole board believes you've changed, that's their burden, not mine." Relief broke across her face, muted but unmistakable. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Drake said, rising from his chair. "This isn't for you. I simply have better things to spend my time on." She looked up at him, a question still lingering in her eyes. "You never forgave me, did you?" He paused at the door, not turning. His voice was quieter now, but no less resolute. "Forgiveness requires trust, and trust requires redemption. I don't trust you, Vanessa. I never will." She nodded, absorbing the blow without resistance. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I hope you find peace." Drake turned slightly, meeting her eyes one final time. "I'm not looking for peace," he said. "I've found purpose. That's enough." And with that, he was gone. As he stepped back into the open air, past the reinforced gates and sterile corridors, Drake felt no emotional release, no sudden sense of closure. There was no cinematic catharsis waiting for him, only the cold, exacting clarity that Vanessa Reed Sullivan no longer mattered. She had become what all his targets eventually became: an example, a consequence. His phone vibrated, a message from Teresa Alvarez. "Judge Lawrence Baxter, Third Circuit, multiple dismissed cases tied to suspicious financial deposits. Preliminary files uploaded, awaiting your review." A faint smile curved Drake's lips. The mission endured. 6 months later, Drake stood on the terrace of his penthouse, the Philadelphia skyline glittering beneath a moonlit haze. The lights of the city sparkled like circuitry. Every window, every alley, every office tower, a node in the sprawling machine of power, corruption, and the rare, flickering pulse of justice. Sullivan's Grill had grown, 7 thriving locations across 3 states. To the public, Drake Sullivan was a culinary mogul, a man of taste and business acumen. But beneath that carefully cultivated image lay the true architecture of his life. A covert network of agents, advocates, and allies embedded in the federal judiciary, the financial underworld, and even the Senate. People like Agent Marcus Rivera, driven prosecutors like Claire Winters, and bold reformers like Senator Maxwell Carter had learned to trust him. Not because follow authorities, but because he knew when to break them with surgical precision. They brought him their failures, the cases too messy, too shielded, too corrupted to see daylight. Drake evaluated each with the eye of a strategist and the conviction of a crusader, taking on only what could not be ignored. He moved in silence, his hand unseen but deliberate. Those he exposed never saw him coming. They only saw the consequences: federal raids, court orders, sealed indictments. No one traced the blow back to the man in the shadows, the restaurateur with impeccable suits and no patience for immunity. His encrypted line buzzed again. New development. Supreme Court Justice Layton implicated in bribery ring. DOJ evidence compromised. High-level interference confirmed. Immediate intervention needed. Carter Drake's fingers moved without hesitation. "Send everything you have. We begin tonight." This was what he had become. No longer the husband eager to please. No longer the target of a cruel conspiracy. He was now the counterforce, the reckoning. Not a vigilante driven by rage, but a strategist compelled by justice denied. The betrayal that should have broken him had reforged him into something the Reeds and their ilk never anticipated. They had underestimated the quiet man in the corner, the one they thought pliable, disposable. But some men, when shattered, don't fall apart. They sharpen. As Drake turned from the window, the lights of the city still gleaming like stars scattered across a map of war, he let a final thought settle into his mind. They tried to destroy me. Instead, they built their executioner. A flicker of emotion crossed the screen as the final words of the story faded. Quiet, but not empty. In that breath between silence and reflection, something deeper stirred. It wasn't just a tale, it was a mirror, held up to the kaleidoscope of human lives. One person's betrayal, another's redemption. Somewhere, a whistleblower named Anthony Reyes paid with his life to expose a corrupt judge's empire. Elsewhere, a weary woman named Marilyn Reed grappled with the shame of knowing she had once chosen silence over justice. In these slivers of reality, viewers didn't just see strangers, they saw echoes of themselves. That's the alchemy of storytelling. It reveals that no path is identical, no truth absolute. Every viewer brings their own shadows, triumphs, regrets, and hopes to the table. And when those personal histories collide with the lives shown on screen, something extraordinary happens. Understanding, compassion, change. Behind the scenes, figures like Drake Sullivan, a man forced from his own restaurant by betrayal, yet now rising to confront the corrupt machinery that tried to crush him, become more than characters. They become symbols of resilience, of moral grit, of the courage to claw truth from the guise of deception. His enemies, Vanessa Reed Sullivan and her lover Brendan Walsh, Judge Norman Reed and his network of Rod, are not just villains in a story. They are embodiments of the injustice that too often poisons real systems. But as we peel back the layers of those lives, we are reminded that everyone, even the accomplices, be it Gloria Reed or Elaine Matthews, harbors battles we may never fully see. And that even those like Senator Maxwell Carter, trying to broker uneasy alliances, or Claire Winters, hungry for real justice, are walking fault lines between ambition and integrity. When you listen to stories like these, you're not just a passive observer. You're invited into the reckoning, into the question, what would I do? Who would I become? And so we ask, gently but earnestly, for your voice, your perspective, not just to validate our efforts, but to strengthen the mosaic of humanity we're weaving here. Feedback is not a formality. It is the lifeblood of truth-telling. Each comment, each shared story is another puzzle piece in understanding what it means to be alive, afraid, brave, betrayed, and still standing. Whether this is your first time watching or your 50th, your insight matters. Your story matters. Because this, what we're building, isn't just a feed of content. It's a collective memory. One where a farmer's integrity, a chef's loyalty, a prosecutor's fire, a private investigator's tenacity, all merge into a single unwavering chorus. We see you, we hear you, we learn from you. So if a flicker of recognition passed through you during this journey, if a line made your breath catch, or your thoughts drift to something you've buried, stay with us. The next story may carry you further. And if you haven't yet, join this growing circle of witnesses, thinkers, and truth seekers. We're not here to sensationalize. We're here to reflect, to evolve, to remind each other that beyond algorithms and screens, there are still stories that change us. Until next time, stay aware, stay bold, and above all, stay curious.